Hello guys and gals, what will you do if you're just casually strolling down the street and you happen to be summoned to a world of magic and fantasy, where you become the slave of a spoiled rich girl who is the worst in her school and treats you like a dog? Well, that's just the initial premise of this awesome anime called The Familiar of Zero. Let's dive into it. The anime begins with a beautiful girl named Louise who is getting ready to attend her magic classes at a Hogwarts-like academy for wizards called Tristrain. The new teacher for the second-year class intends to teach them a basic alchemy spell and calls upon Louise to perform it, but her classmates get scared and tell the teacher it's not a good idea. The teacher simply responds that nothing will happen because it's just a basic alchemy spell, saying, "What could go wrong?" On the other hand, the director, who seems to be a constantly peeking at Matilda Fouquet's underwear, which is his secretary, is happy that the year has started without any problems. However, he spoke too soon because we hear how Louise ends up causing an explosion in her classroom. The protagonist is taken to the principal's office and her classmates mock her since she always causes trouble. One of the students, Kirkit, seems to antagonize her and pretends to know why the troublemaker isn't being punished. But Louise replies that all the responsibility falls on the teacher because she allowed her to use magic. Still, Kirky mocks her and mentions that they will have to summon a familiar the next day, and she can't wait to see the nonsense that the famous Zero Louise will do. Louise gets angry and tells her that she will summon the strongest familiar of all. The day arrives and everyone summons their familiars. There are animals of all kinds, and we see how the most conceited guy named Gyuch ironically ends up with a mole. Just when it seems like everyone has summoned their familiars, Kirch, who summoned his salamander, reminds Louise that she's still missing. Reluctantly, Louise performs her spell, and as usual, it causes an explosion. But this time, she manages to summon something only to find out that it's a boy. Everyone mocks her, saying that he's just a plebeian and therefore not impressive at all. Louise wants to repeat the ritual, but the professor refuses, explaining that it can only be done once, so she'll have to form a pact with him. The boy is bewildered and can't believe everything that's happening. Louise completes the familiar contract by giving the confused boy a kiss, causing him to experience a strong magical sensation. Then a seal appears on his hand, which seems to alarm the professor, and the boy eventually faints from the pain. Louise takes him to her room and tries to accept him as her servant, but the problem is that he doesn't understand her language. After some attempts to make him wash her clothes and underwear, Louise attempts to cast a silence spell on him, but it goes wrong in the best possible way. After the casting, they can finally understand each other. The boy introduces himself as Saito, and then Louise explains everything to him. However, the protagonist doesn't hesitate to try and escape since he thinks they're all crazy to believe in magic. On the way down, he encounters Gooch, who is flirting with the first-year girl. Gooch doesn't stop him, but the protagonist has to keep running because Louise approaches him and asks Gooch for help in catching him. The protagonist escapes and encounters Kirchi, who is also flirting with someone, but she's curious to see what happens. Gucci lifts the protagonist and Kirky mocks him since it's the first time a familiar has escaped from its master. Meanwhile, the protagonist sees two moons in the night sky and realizes that he's not on Earth anymore. The protagonist explains to Louise where he comes from, but she doesn't seem to care since he's her property, and that can't be changed. She asks him to wash her clothes and basically be her servant, and for the time being, the protagonist agrees to play along. The next day, Louise forces him to dress her, putting her food at stake, and then they go to have breakfast. The protagonist gets excited when he sees a buffet, but it turns out it's only for the nobles, so he has to eat on the floor. Poor guy. After the meal, Louise tells him that he should be grateful because familiars are usually not allowed to eat inside. Now they should spend some time together since all second-year alumni don't have classes, so they can improve their bond. Everyone is in the gardens, and Kirch continues to mock Louise because the protagonist tried to escape, and she gets upset. The protagonist starts wandering around and bumps into a maid named Siesta, who was supposed to deliver a cake to Gooch. The protagonist takes the opportunity to get revenge for last night's levitation and decides to deliver the cake himself. He starts causing trouble to expose Gooch as a womanizer. Luckily, the girl from the previous night had gone to see Gooch, so the protagonist helps her find him, and it becomes evident that Gucci was seeing two girls at the same time. And then Montmorency slaps him for being unfaithful. Everyone starts mocking him because he brought it upon himself, but Gucci seeks revenge and challenges the protagonist to a duel. Louise tries to make his familiar apologize to Gucci because as a plebeian he could never defeat a noble, but the protagonist doesn't care and presents himself for the duel. Gucci summons a night golem to fight for him, and it delivers a blow that knocks Saito to the ground. Louise tries again to make him surrender, as you should see by now that he can't win, but still doesn't care. Meanwhile, the teacher informs the principal about Sato's marks. The principal seems concerned and immediately requests absolute discretion. Back to the protagonist, he receives a beating but doesn't give up because, despite all the bad things happening to him in this world, he doesn't plan to kneel before anyone. Gucci summons a sword for him due to pity and to be able to actually knock him down. The protagonist doesn't care and takes the sword, but then the mark on his hand starts glowing and all pain disappears. He manages to actually defeat all the golems and even forces surrender onto Gucci, Everyone is amazed, but the protagonist faints as soon as he releases the sword. 3 days later, the protagonist wakes up and Siesta visits him to feed him. He is surprised to find out that Louise had been taking care of him all this time, although he also finds her quite adorable while asleep, thinking it's a waste because her personality is the complete opposite. Nevertheless, the protagonist has to do his household chores because Louise was only taking care of him because she couldn't let her familiar die, so she tells him no assumptions should be made. Kirchi, on the other hand, has had her eye on him since the duel ended. Saito accompanies Louise to her magic classes and discovers that everyone stares at her because she can't perform any type of magic successfully, thus earning her the nickname Zero Louise. Normally, mages who can wield an element are called dot mages and line, triangle, and lastly square mages when they can master all 4 elements. When the class is over, Saito starts mocking Louise, even with songs, which irritates Louise, and she decides to take away 1 meal from him each time he calls her Zero. The protagonist starts starving and begs for Louise's mercy, so she concedes but regrets it when the protagonist accidentally mentions that besides being a 0 in magic, he is also a 0 in breast size, prompting Louise to kick him out to sleep outside. Siesta finds him and takes him to the academy's kitchen, where everyone is a plebeian and considers him a hero for defeating a noble. But when they see that he doesn't boast about his strength, they idolize him even more, to the point of wanting to kiss him. Siesta is grateful to the protagonist for bringing so much excitement, and she tells him that Louise took great care of him because he was on the brink of death and even had to buy an expensive potion for healing him. When he returns to sleep, the salamander kidnaps him to bring him to Kirch, who claims to have fallen in love with him since she saw him defeat Gitch in the duel and wants to seduce him. However, she is interrupted by several of her friends. Before anything can happen, Louise interrupts them because he is her familiar. Kirchi tells her that she should let him have his own romantic relationships, and the protagonist agrees, but he realizes that if they continue, an army of nobles will be after him for revenge, so Saito leaves, although Kirch says she won't give up. Louise scolds Saito for getting involved with Kirch, since their families have been enemies for a long time. The Zerbsts and the Valier. She forbids him from associating with her, but Saito explains that he didn't do it on purpose because the salamander kidnapped him. Louise acknowledges that she needs to be able to defend himself, so the next day they go to town to buy a sword. Kirchi sees them leaving and decides to follow them. In order to do it, she asks her friend Tabitha for help since her familiar is a dragon and can easily find them. In the town, Louise searches for a large and heavy sword like the one Gooch made, but she does so in a very arrogant manner, leading the vendor to try to swindle them by selling them a golden sword at an exorbitant price. Since Louise doesn't have that much money, she offers them scrap in exchange for what they can afford, and Louise accepts it, as it is better than nothing, although the protagonist doesn't seem pleased. However, he calms down when he realizes that Louise spent a lot of money on the potion that saved his life. Kirchi manages to figure out what they were trying to do, so she buys the most expensive sword for the protagonist, seducing the vendor to give it to her at a ridiculously low price. Due to this, Louise gets angry for being spied on, and they are about to start a fight, but Tabitha stops them because it's forbidden. Since they can't resolve it among themselves, they ask the protagonist to decide which one he prefers, but he realizes that they are not talking about swords. However, as they make a lot of noise, the old sword starts talking, and it turns out to be a particular sword with a mind of its own called Derfliner. The sword awakens thanks to the protagonist's talent, and he becomes fond of it and keeps it, leaving Louise confused about why always these strange things appear in front of her. The next day, the school is informed that there is a thief stealing valuable objects, so they should take care of their magical items. However, the director doesn't seem worried since the school's vault was created by several magicians who control all the elements, the square mages. At night, the protagonist has to wash Louise's clothes, and on his way back, he encounters Kirchi, who convinces him to enter her room by saying she will give him the sword she bought. However, she only wants to be alone with him. So the protagonist asks her what she sees in him, and she gets angry because she doesn't see anything good in him, but she still wants him. Kirchi knocks him down because she won't let him go, but Louise appears to take him away and punishes him for falling into the same trap more than once. The next day, Louise forbids the protagonist from entering her classes because he was peeking at the girl's underwear. So the protagonist has a lot of free time, and the school's chef invites him to eat. The protagonist wonders where Siesta is, but it turns out she was recruited by the noble who came to report the thefts, Count Mott. The protagonist worries because he heard that nobles use young maids as lovers, so as soon as he can, he finds out where this noble lives and goes to his house. Louise finds out because Gucci told her, but the protagonist arrives just in time. Count Mott agrees to see him, and the protagonist asks him to return Siesta to the school, since he heard that maids end up becoming nobles' lovers, and the Count doesn't deny it, as it is supposedly an honor for plebeians. The protagonist believes that doing this makes him an old pervert, so the Count gets angry because he feels insulted. Siesta enters to beg for his forgiveness, so the Count agrees to the protagonist's request if he gets him a book he has been searching for a long time. This book is the treasure of Kirchi's family, so the protagonist realizes it and rushes back to the school. On the way, Louise finds him and scolds him for acting without thinking, but the protagonist doesn't tell her anything about what happened. When he falls asleep, He goes to Kirchi's room to tell her what happened and asks for the book. This book helps couples stimulate each other, so Kirchi doesn't need it, but she won't give it to him for free. The protagonist gets angry because it's the same as what the other noble did, so he grabs the sword and heads to the Count's castle to handle things forcefully. Kirchi informs Louise because unsheathing a sword in a noble's house would be seen as an offense. Meanwhile, the protagonist is caught at the entrance of the Count's house and brought before him. The Count starts provoking the protagonist, who unsheathes his sword, and the Count attacks him since he is a mage who can combine 3 elements and can execute it if he wants after what the protagonist did. The protagonist is about to be killed, but Louise and the others arrive to save him. They apologize and Louise takes full responsibility. The Count mentions that it's too serious and could harm her family, but Kirchi offers him the book he was looking for, so he forgives Saito and releases Siesta. The protagonist recognizes the book as a graphic magazine. Siesta thanks the protagonist for insisting on rescuing her and kisses him on the cheek. Back to their room, Louise isn't happy and plans to punish Saito like never before. The next day, Louise tries to teach the protagonist a few moves because he has to showcase the progress he's made as her familiar. She asks him to do something with the sword, but the protagonist lacks confidence since he couldn't master it at the Count's house. Meanwhile, the secretary informs the director about the preparations, but he is only concerned about the color of his underwear, which angers the poor woman. Louise leaves Saito alone to think about what he can do while she goes to class. The protagonist starts training with the sword, but it doesn't work. Siesta sees him and explains that the next event for familiars is quite important because the princess of the kingdom is coming to visit, and that's why all the students are polishing their presentations so much. There will also be a prize for the winner, so some are eager to win it. The professor reorganizes the castle's defenses as he doesn't believe the bandit trying to steal his vault will attack, while the royal guard is at the school. Besides, the vault is too powerful for a mage of her ability to open. Then the princess arrives at the school and everyone is amazed by her beauty. In the evening, the protagonist continues trying to perform a good sword trick, but their practice is interrupted by a visit from Princess Henrietta herself. It turns out that she was childhood friends with Louise and they promised to always help each other. Despite that, Louise still treats her with a lot of respect. Although the princess doesn't mind being casual like the protagonist, she was curious because not everyone dares to stand up to a noble, and it was she who helped Louise in front of the royal court so that her family wouldn't face consequences for the incident with Count Mott. Louise is even more grateful now, but the princess says she did it because she promised to help her. The next day, the family presentations begin and everyone does quite well. Then it's Louise's turn, but she doesn't know how to present it since the protagonist is a plebeian. The protagonist tries to do sword tricks with Derflinger's help, but the sword doesn't play along, making them the laughingstock of the event. Meanwhile, the bandit is surprised by the strength of the vault's spell, so she summons a golem to try to destroy it with physical force, but that doesn't work either. The bandit tries to capture Louise and the protagonist when they pass by, but Saito keeps Louise away and ends up being captured himself. Louise tries to save him, but her spell fails and does nothing to the golem. However, the bandit realizes that the failed spell manages to break the vault's wall, allowing her to steal the treasure. Meanwhile, Tabitha has won the competition, so she takes another flight and notices the bandit's golem. She approaches and saves the protagonist, but the bandit manages to escape despite their attempts to capture her. The protagonist believes everything is fine since no one was hurt, but Louise doesn't think the same. Then the princess arrives to say goodbye as she has to report everything to the royal court. This worries Louise even more because there are nasty rumors about the princess due to these ongoing robberies. The next day, the teachers are not conducting classes due to the robbery, and rumors circulate that the royal court is blaming the princess because the security was displaced due to her visit to the school. However, Louise and Tabitha are called since they had seen the bandit, and they want to confirm a drawing made by a villager from the surroundings. Upon confirming that it is indeed the bandit, they gather those willing to go hunt her down before she escapes. However, only Louise, Kirchi, and Tabitha accept the mission, and the secretary accompanies them as a guide. Sega wonders why a noble is stealing, but it turns out that some nobles renounce their status for various reasons, just like the secretary, who is not considered a noble despite using magic. Kirchi clings to the protagonist to use his sword, and upon seeing that Louise doesn't mind, he reluctantly agrees to use it. However, Louise is only being a typical tsundere girl and is actually furious. They arrive at the cabin where the bandit was supposedly seen but find no one. The secretary goes to check the surroundings, but Tabitha finds the destroyed staff they stole. However, before confirming if it's inside its box, they are attacked by a golem. Neither Tabitha's wind magic nor Kirchi's fire magic work, so Louise tries to use her magic, but it also fails. The golem almost kills Louise if not for the protagonist saving her. Louise refuses to back down because she is a noble and nobles never retreat, so the protagonist slaps her for being too stubborn, explaining that such things don't matter if you end up dead. Louise starts crying because if she runs away, people will continue to make fun of her as always. The protagonist lifts her onto Tabitha's dragon and decides to fight the golem himself, using Kirchi's sword. However, it breaks on the first attack. Derflinger tells him to use it so that he can win, and when he unsheathes it, the protagonist's mark activates, allowing him to cut the golem. However, it regenerates, so the victory again seems far away. Louise takes out the destruction staff and tries to use it to defeat the golem, but it doesn't work as it's a grenade launcher. The protagonist realizes this and rushes to throw a bomb at the golem. They know the bandit must be nearby because of the golem, but the secretary reveals that she has always been the bandit and left the staff for someone to teach her how to use it. She knows about the protagonist's mark, so she tries to kill him with the staff, but it only has one shot, and he manages to knock her out. Later, the director and the royal court congratulate and reward them for capturing the culprit, but only the nobles receive recognition. The protagonist agrees to this, but asks in return to be told about the staff. It turns out that when the director was young, he met a man who used the staff to save his life, but the man died from his injuries. The professor is surprised as they hadn't imagined that the protagonist and the staff came from another world, but the protagonist is more shocked because he thought he would get a clue to return to his world. The celebration begins and everyone tries to court Louise, but she wants to dance with the protagonist for saving her. So she politely asks him for the first and only time, and they start dancing. Louise confirms that the protagonist wants to return to his world, so she becomes sad but thanks him for saving her. However, he uses the same technique as Louise, saying he did it only because it's his responsibility as her familiar. The next day, the princess promotes Louise and invites them to the capital. Since the protagonist cannot receive rewards, she offers him her hand, and Louise tells him that when Her Highness does this, it means he should kiss it. The protagonist takes advantage of the situation and gallantly kisses her in the mouth. Louise slaps him because she meant a hand kiss, but at the end, the princess doesn't mind as his loyalty deserves a reward. In reality, the princess had called them to investigate the city disguised as plebeians, as there are rumors of nobles being oppressive. So it's the turn of our protagonist to walk around. Louise doesn't know how to live as a plebeian, so she tries to buy a horse and stay in luxury hotels, but they don't have enough money. She goes off to think but ends up losing all their money in the casino. The protagonist doesn't know where they will sleep now that they have no money, but suddenly, they encounter a feisty transvestite named Scarin who owns a tavern. Scarin offers them a place to stay if Louise helps him out due to her cuteness. Scarin introduces her as the new waitress, while the protagonist will be helping in the kitchen. However, there is a competition among the girls. The one who earns the most tips in a week can wear a special dress that men splurge their money on. The previous person who wore it earned enough to retire. Louise wants to take advantage of this opportunity, but her attitude doesn't help as she starts shouting at customers and Scarin has to calm them down with kisses. Louise is annoyed because the room is not pretty, but the protagonist doesn't mind as it's not very different from what he's used to. However, Louise can't sleep alone because there are bats, so she has to sleep next to the protagonist. The next day, Louise continues to struggle as she ends up shouting at or hitting all the customers. Scarin sends her to observe her colleagues from the corner. Meanwhile, Saito continues talking to a girl named Jessica in the kitchen, who is Scarin's daughter. But when Louise sees him so happy, she throws a bottle at him, knocking him unconscious. Jessica takes him to her room and starts interrogating him, as Louise doesn't seem like a plebeian. She suspects they are on some kind of mission and tries to extract information by offering to do dirty things to him. However, Louise suddenly appears and puts the protagonist to sleep again with a kick to the groin. Jessica starts annoying Louise, saying she should be working because she can't even earn good tips. Louise gets heated and says that if she puts her mind to it, she would be the best of all and win the prize. Nevertheless, Louise remains in the corner, and on the last day of the week, she hasn't made any progress. But then, a noble arrives, the city's tax collector, who kicks everyone out of the tavern to have it to himself. It turns out that no one messes with him because he charges exorbitant taxes to those he dislikes, and with the girls, he is stingy despite groping them. But Louise only sees that he is a noble and tries to improve her tip ranking by using him. The tax collector mistakes her for a boy due to her lack of cleavage, but he still wants to verify how small they are. Louise hits him, and the angry tax collector tries to attack her. The protagonist has to step in to defend her, but since he forgot his sword, Louise has no choice but to blast them away with her explosions. The tax collector thinks she is a ruined noble and still tries to attack her, but when she shows him her royal certificate, he regrets messing with her and flees, leaving a pile of tips behind. Louise wins thanks to this, but they still have to leave because their secret has been discovered. However, Louise still wants to try on the prize dress, even if she only shows it to Saito, making him blush. On another note, the bandit is rescued by someone who seems to have known her for a long time. Our protagonists return to the school, but Saito notices that it's empty because it's summer vacation and many students have gone home. They see Kirch and Tabitha leaving for Tabitha's house, and since he is very friendly with them, Louise becomes annoyed and leaves him with a pile of work. Sega realizes that some things never change as Gooch continues with his unsincere apology to Montmorency for his infidelity. However, he notices a giant pot being thrown away and comes up with a great idea to use it as a washing basin. Meanwhile, near Tabitha's house, there was a flood, so they have to take another route. Kirchy notices logos of the royal family from another country and confirms that Tabitha is of royalty. When they arrive at Tabitha's house, she leaves Louise waiting while she goes to see her family. The butler apologizes to Louise, but is surprised to hear that Miss Charlotte goes by the name Tabitha at school. He then tells her the story of Tabitha's / Charlotte's family the Orleans family. At present, her uncle is the king, but her father was supposed to be the next king of Gallia, as he was much more talented. However, there was a succession battle, and her father died in that battle. Some nobles wanted to get rid of Tabitha as well, but her mother realized the threat against her daughter and sacrificed herself, going insane due to a spell. Tabitha is the doll her mother gave her, and now she believes it is her daughter. As a result, Tabitha became cold and reserved. Later, she was sent on numerous impossible tasks, but because Tabitha had exceptional talent, she managed to overcome all the challenges imposed on her to protect her family. Instead of allowing her to live a peaceful life, they only granted her a noble title and banished her from the country. Kerchi can relate to her story as she was also expelled from her country. Back at the school, Montmorency prepares a potion to get revenge on Gooch. Meanwhile, the protagonist turns the giant pot into a bathtub and relaxes as if he were at home. Siesta passes by and is surprised to see him, but since her clothes got dirty, she decides to enter the bath while her clothes dry. This makes the protagonist nervous, but Siesta trusts him, so she doesn't mind entering. The protagonist starts talking about his world, but Siesta thinks he's joking, as a place with only one moon and no mages sounds very strange. Meanwhile, Montmorency keeps trying to give a potion to Gooch. Meanwhile, Louise goes out to see why Saito is taking so long. She is surprised to find him taking a bath with Siesta and truly shocked leaves without doing anything. Siesta is reminded of her great-grandfather by the stories the protagonist tells, as he also claimed to have fallen from the sky out of nowhere. But now she has to go back to work. So she changes and leaves, making it clear that what she liked the most about the shower was the protagonist, causing him to blush. Louise is very angry but doesn't know why. She goes to the table where Gooch is and drinks his beverage, which had been enchanted by Montmorency. Later, when the protagonist returns to the room, he finds Louise drunk and starts a jealous scene, making her cry. But Montmorency clarifies the situation. On the other hand, Tabitha has been assigned another dangerous mission, which is why she had to return to her house. Kerchi decides to help her, and when she learns that Tabitha has nightmares, she lies down next to her to provide comfort with her warmth. The princess wants to assign them a secret mission since she is going to marry the Prince of Germania, and they need to ally with a militarily strong country. To ensure the success of the alliance, they must prevent the contents of a sent letter from becoming public. Therefore, they are sent to the kingdom of Albion to retrieve the letter. Gooch overhears the conversation, and as his father is also renowned, they accept his help. The protagonist continues to play the role of a servant, and Siesta apologizes for not believing him about the potion. However, the protagonist is intrigued by the name Gandalfr, since he has been called that twice. He visits the master and learns that Gandalfr was the familiar of the legendary Void Mage, but it is not confirmed since Louise is far from being legendary. Louise doubts herself because she struggles to use magic correctly. However, the protagonist promises to protect her, which irritates her and makes her blush. The next day, they wait for the bodyguard the princess sent with them. However, Gooch's familiar attacks Louise because of the ring given to her by the princess. Someone named Wards arrives and quickly dismisses the familiar to rescue Louise. Wards, the captain of the Griffin Squadron and Louise's fiancé, takes her on his griffin for the journey. The protagonist seems jealous as Louise blushes whenever she talks to Wards. They arrive in the city where they will board the ship to Albion and rest in a hotel for a day. However, the protagonist doesn't like Wards, which upsets Louise. She explains that the marriage was planned by their parents, but she admires Wards nonetheless. This makes the protagonist question if his presence was really necessary, which further annoys Louise. During dinner, Wards learns about the protagonist's exploits and becomes interested in him. He challenges the protagonist to a duel, and the protagonist accepts. Wards takes Louise to her room because he wants to tell her something, leaving the protagonist in the same room as Gooch, who has to attend to a lady he found attractive. The protagonist is left alone. He takes the opportunity to ask Delflinger if he knows about Gandalfr, and Delflinger confirms that he is Gandalfr. Delflinger awakened because he was Gandalfr's companion for 6,000 years. Meanwhile, Wards recalls Louise's past, where she used to cry and he would comfort her. He always felt a unique power in her, which is why he wants to marry her and become a noble with national and international influence. However, when he's about to kiss her, Louise thinks of the protagonist and the guy resolves to win her heart. The protagonist discovers that his mark gives him the power to use any weapon created for that purpose. That's why the golden sword didn't work since it was decorative. However, the strength of the weapon still depends on him, so he can't guarantee that he will defeat Wards. The next day, their duel begins and the protagonist attacks with all his strength. Wards admits that he is quite fast, but his technique is poor, with many openings, and he barely uses magic. The protagonist is defeated by Wards, and he hurries to say that this is proof that he wouldn't be able to protect Louise from a real mage. The protagonist is so upset that sometime later he seems to be crying when Louise finds him, but he excuses himself by saying that he was just reminiscing about his world. This annoys Louise, but it's evident that she is also affected by his loss to Wards after not being able to communicate sincerely with him. She ends up telling him that she will marry Wards after completing the mission. Oof. The protagonist looks depressed, But then the bandit arrives and attacks them with her giant golem, allowing wards to take Louise by telling her that the protagonist and Gooch have returned home. To make matters worse, they just had an argument, so Louise believes the lie and goes to the port to board the ship. The protagonist and Gooch struggle to defeat the golem, but Kirch and Tabitha arrive. They followed them because they found wards attractive. The bandit is forced to retreat after causing a commotion. The protagonist learns that the ship has already sailed, so he shouts Louise's name with all his strength, and she manages to hear it, although she thinks it's her imagination. Wards becomes jealous because Louise is thinking about Saito, but she denies it. To prove that she's telling the truth, she accepts Ward's marriage proposal, although she still has doubts. Meanwhile, Saito and the others have to wait until the next day for another ship. However, Yuchi's familiar catches up with them. The following day, they arrive at the place where the Prince of Albion is hiding. At first, they doubt that the princess really sent them, but when they see the princess's ring, they confirm that she did indeed send them. The prince reads the princess's message and hands the letter to Louise. However, he has no intention of leaving his people, as this is not an ordinary civil war. An organization called Reconquista is behind everything, and now that he knows who he's fighting against, he will stay to defend his kingdom, even if it costs him his life. On their way out, Wards waits for Louise to ask the prince for their marriage. However, Louise thinks it's too soon, but Wards forces her and reveals that it is necessary for Reconquista. Louise realizes that Wards is not on the side of the good guys, but then Cromwell hypnotizes her, calling her a descendant of the Void. They proceed with the wedding while she is under hypnosis. However, before she accepts marrying Wards, a protagonist enters the church. Breach's familiar recognizes the scent of Louise's ring, and she breaks free from the hypnosis, trying to warn the prince. But Wards kills him first. Before the prince gives his ring to Louise, and the protagonist is angry at Wards for being a traitor. Wards dismisses them all but decides to kill Louise, since if she can't be his, she can't be anyone else's. He sets the church on fire and leaves. Louise tries to chase after him, but the protagonist stops her, and they are barely saved by Tabitha and Kirchi, who levitate them to safety with their dragon. Louise is unconscious and she dreams about Wards in the past, becoming deeply saddened. While slowly waking up, Wards starts to vanish, and in its place, Saito appears. When Louise is completely awake, she notices that she and Saito are kissing. A little surprised at first, she closes her eyes while the kiss continues and our heroes fly on the horizon on Tabitha's dragon. What an episode. The next day, Louise apologizes to the princess for failing to protect the prince and losing the letter. However, what matters to her most is that the prince entrusted her with his ring and his final words, so she holds no grudges. Back at the school, the professor embarks on an expedition, believing he has found an ancient dragon. Louise submits her mission report to the director and also asks about the descendants of the Void since they called her by that name. The director tells her about the legendary element and the familiar called Gandalfr. Louise can't believe that Saito is someone so spectacular. However, she now feels embarrassed when he sees her name, and she's embarrassed because Saito acts normal even though they have kissed. Suddenly, her panties drop down. She proceeds to interrogate him about why rubber band of her underwear is loose. Sega recalls that he just washed them too harshly, but this misunderstanding ends with her kicking him out, and he happily leaves because he is fed with a rude attitude. Sista notices that the protagonist is lost in thought, so she sits down to talk with him. Saito takes the opportunity to ask her about her great-grandfather who came from another world. It turns out he arrived riding a dragon, and the dragon is still preserved as a relic. The protagonist asks Siesta to take him to that village to investigate, but Kirky overhears the conversation and becomes interested in the relic, deciding to follow them. Louise feels bad for treating him poorly, but her mood worsens when she realizes that Saito is heading to Siesta's house. She recognizes the name of the village since it's the same place her professor was going to visit. The protagonist arrives at the village and Siesta finds out where the treasure is located alone, so her family won't misinterpret things. They head to the cave, but they are intercepted by their friends who follow them. They enter the cave, and they have to go deep inside. Kirchi starts to get scared, but things take a turn for the worse as they discover someone else is in the cave. However, it turns out to be their professor, who was with Louise. The professor explains why he is there, and they realize that they are all searching for the same thing, the dragon's mantle. They reach a hangar, and there is a tomb with Japanese inscriptions. The protagonist confirms that Siesta's great-grandfather was also transported from his world, and when they see the dragon's plumage, it turns out to be a warplane that reacts to the protagonist's mark. The professor theorizes that there were two dragons, but one disappeared during the eclipse. If the protagonist goes with this dragon during the eclipse, he should be able to return to his world. However, this saddens Louise as he will be leaving her side. Meanwhile, the princess apologizes to her mother for sending that letter, but her mother is not angry since even though Germania withdrew the marriage proposal, she is the one who lost her beloved. However, they receive some very bad news. Back at the school, they need fuel for the plane. The protagonist remembers that the professor had the dragon's blood, which is actually gasoline. They They will have to reproduce it in large quantities to fly the plane. After a while, the protagonist also realizes that by riding the plane, he learns to control it. Now they just have to wait for an eclipse to be able to return home. Louise is upset, so she acts like a typical tsundere. Gucci arrives with bad news. Albion changed its name to Reconquista and declared war on them. Cromwell took control of the country by hypnotizing all the important nobles using the water spirit's ring, which contains an enormous amount of mana. Returning to school, Louise doesn't say anything to Saito, and after confirming that he will return to his world, she pretends to be happy for him. But deep down, she doesn't want him to leave. At night, the school is temporarily closed due to the war. So Louise says goodbye to the protagonist and leaves him a letter supposedly granting him his freedom since she went with the princess to fight in the war. Reconquista begins its attack on Siesta's village just a day before the eclipse. The kingdom decides to defend the village, and upon learning that Siesta's village has been attacked, the protagonist decides to go and help her. The protagonist is all set to go, but he lacks the space to take off. Tabitha helps him by giving him a gust of wind to lift off, and then she goes to the battlefield to assist him, with Kirky also joining. On the battlefield, the Griffins and the Knights of the Kingdom try to destroy the enemy ship but are easily defeated until the protagonist appears and starts fighting the dragons. Seeing this, Wards can't stand idle, so he enters the battlefield and the bandit also fights, summoning a golem to keep everyone on the ground at bay. Wards uses a much faster dragon and takes care of the attacks, but the protagonist can absorb them with his sword, although he ran out of ammunition and cannot attack. The bandit, upon seeing the academy students, confronts them, and they decide to fight as a team. Gucci uses alchemy to fill the golem with oil, and Kirk sets it on fire, forcing the bandit to retreat. The protagonist is in trouble as he continues to receive attacks, so Louise jumps onto the plane with Tabitha's help. After the protagonist wholeheartedly accepts the role of defending Louise as her familiar, they form a complete bond, and Louise begins a void magic spell, while the protagonist tries to survive until he is launched. Louise succeeds and destroys the warship, but the protagonist has to make an emergency landing as the plane is falling apart. However, Cromwell is still standing, and he almost takes control of Tabitha and Kirch if it weren't for Gooch, who grabs him from behind and knocks him out with a blow. The protagonist waits until Louise wakes up, and she still doesn't understand why he decided to help them instead of going back to his world. Nevertheless, she kisses him. Seconds later, to dispel any misconceptions, she says it was only to renew the contract with him. During the credits, we can see that everyone is getting praised for defending the kingdom, and Louise discovers Saito talking to Siesta, which enrages her. Same as always, right? Season 2. We begin with Saito hazing a nightmare in which he travels back to his world, but Louise doesn't accompany him. He feels that nothing makes sense and wakes up as he falls off the bed. He then hugs Louise, feeling happy that they haven't separated. Being a good tsundere, Louise can't let her happiness show, so she pushes him away and tells him that, as a gratitude for saving her, he can sleep beside her and she won't treat him like a dog anymore. However, in return, he can't see other girls. Durflanger says that despite all, they're getting along pretty well, but it wonders how long it's going to last. After the opening, we get to the capital where the princess has to be crowned as the people want their new queen to lead them in the war against Albion. Meanwhile, a mysterious woman visits Cromwell and tells him she managed to steal the water spirit's ring during the ceremony, and then silences Cromwell. Back with the protagonist, Louise gives him a pair of glasses and he reluctantly puts them on. He goes out and sees Siesta, so he goes to greet her, but his gaze falls upon her ample bosom and the glasses start beeping. These glasses beep whenever he looks at someone with the eyes who isn't the person who gave him the glasses, so Louise explodes in anger. She takes him away, considering him unfaithful, but every time a girl passes by, the glasses keep beeping and Louise ends up causing endless explosions. She gets upset because basically being a woman is enough for him to see her with eyes, so the protagonist covers his eyes to avoid looking at other women. However, the princess is passing by on the street, and his gaze once again falls upon her bosom, triggering the beeping of the glasses. Louise gets angry because she doesn't understand how he can look at the princess with those eyes, so she explodes again, and the royal guards arrest them, thinking it's an attack. Louise tries to see the princess, now the queen, to clear things up, but she is forbidden from doing so. The leader of the musketeers, named Agnes, asks her to calm down as the queen is in a meeting with the academy director. She requests Sato's release, surprising them as they believe he was responsible for the attack. The protagonist realizes that he's a plebeian and it's going to be impossible for him to marry Louise. However, the queen appears and he misinterprets her intentions, trying to kiss her. Agnes intervenes and attacks him, but is stopped by the queen, who asks for the protagonist's help. They learn that it was thanks to them that Albion's attack was repelled, and the queen offers the protagonist anything he desires as incentive to keep helping her. It seems there are many enemies and she cannot trust people that easily, besides he is Gandalfr. Saito is eyeing her breasts, but then Louise enters the scene. The protagonist is scared, thinking she will hit him, but Louise starts crying because they were separated and she was worried. They are returned to the academy to await further instructions. The queen gives them a book containing void magic spells, but the book is literally empty, so they don't understand what to do. Agnes says her goodbyes and threatens the protagonist not to see the queen in a perverted way again. Upon hearing this, Louise whips him all night long. However, the next day, Agnes comes running and enters their bedroom, observing that Saito seems dismayed on the floor and Louise keeps whipping him. Agnes is embarrassed at the situation but insists that it's an emergency. The queen has been kidnapped. It turns out that while the queen was reminiscing about the promises she made with the Prince of Albion, she hears his voice and he appears at her window, telling her that the one they killed was a double. He convinces her to return to Albion with him. Agnes only came to inform them because the musketeers are pursuing her and the rescue mission will be top secret, so they can't tell anyone. The protagonist decides to use the plane which was being repaired by the professor to catch up to the queen, and they manage to take off just in time, but the professor is worried because some parts are missing. The protagonist quickly realizes that the plane is not functioning properly and starts emitting smoke, scaring Louise. On the other hand, the queen remembers when she first met the prince and wakes up that the musketeers catch up to them. The prince has to prevent them from capturing them by force and calms the queen, telling her that he does everything out of love and that he will explain later. The plane can no longer continue and it begins to descend. Louise panics, thinking they are going to die, but Tabitha follows them on her dragon and manages to keep them in the air using her wind magic. The protagonist spots the queen below, so he makes a forced landing in the water. Seeing Prince Albion, they can only assume it's because of the ring, since it has the power to control the dead. They try to inform the princess, but the prince attempts to escape. Tabitha and Kirk block his path. Louise demands that the prince returns the queen, but the queen went with him willingly because she loves him and doesn't believe that he is a revived person being controlled. Tabitha realizes that talking is pointless and attacks directly. Although they leave him in a sorry state, he doesn't die and ends up defeating Tabitha and Kirk. Despite realizing that he is not the same prince she once knew, the queen still wants to go with him because she loves him with all her heart. The protagonist tries to attack them, so the queen starts using her magic, and the prince takes advantage of this to launch a combined attack that only some mages from royal families can perform. The protagonist can't absorb it and barely manages to stop it. Louise checks the spell book and finds a cancellation spell. The protagonist endures as best he can until she finishes casting it, and when it's done, a lightning bolt strikes the prince, defeating him. In his final moments, the prince regains his freedom and apologizes for everything he has done. He asks the queen to forget him because a dead person cannot fulfill the oath of being with her forever. However, he assures her that he will always love her, and the queen breaks down in tears at seeing her beloved die once again. The next day, the kingdom decides to invade Albion. All the men from the academy have to join the army. The protagonist is happy because he will be the only man left in the academy, but then a new exchange student named Giulio arrives and all the girls immediately fall in love with him. The protagonist feels disappointed as Giulio becomes the center of attention and nobody notices him. However, the classes are interrupted because by the kingdom's orders they need to receive military training. Despite the professor's attempts to stop them, the musketeers won't allow it. Montmorency refuses to practice with weapons since, as magicians, they should practice magic. However, Agnes easily defeats her, stating that they need to be prepared for anything. Thus, the training begins. All the girls try to challenge Giulio, but he is only interested in Louise and tries to teach her how to use these defense weapons. This makes the protagonist jealous, although one of the musketeers gives him a wooden sword to practice. However, since the protagonist can't fight with anything other than real weapons, he ends up getting beaten up. Agnes is surprised because she had seen him fight before and he used the sword better than her. But they explain that it's because his powers are activated only with real weapons. Upon hearing this, Giulio challenges the protagonist and says that he could use Delflinger if he wishes, and the reward would be a kiss from Louise. Louise gets upset because she doesn't understand how they ended up in this situation, and the protagonist accepts the challenge. However, Louise opposes it, fearing that if they fight seriously, he could get hurt or killed. She forbids him from using real weapons, so the protagonist agrees to fight with wooden swords. In the afternoon, he asks Agnes to train him with these swords, as he realizes that his powers have certain weaknesses, and if he is not strong on his own, he won't be able to protect Louise. Agnes agrees to train him. Agnes keeps beating him up, but the protagonist learns quickly because his body remembers all the experiences he had on the battlefield. However, he needs to go further as he can't see a way to win. Meanwhile, Louise has been looking everywhere for the protagonist, and Kirchi tells her that she saw him with Agnes, so she goes to them. The protagonist tries to create an opening by angering Agnes, and it works, so Agnes approves of him. However, they end up in a compromising position, and Louise, upon seeing them, sends the protagonist flying and beats him up all night. The next day, Saito is exhausted, but he still plans to attend the duel. The duel begins and Saito performs quite well in Delflinger's eyes. However, he still doesn't see any possibility for Saito to win because Giulio is a master of the sword. The protagonist is also surprised that a clergyman can wield a sword so well, so he tries to provoke him, insinuating that he was not expelled, but rather kicked out. However, this doesn't work on Giulio, who returns the provocation by insinuating that he not only wants to kiss Louise but also Saito. When Giulio attacks, he ends up being the one defeated. Louise is happy and tries to give him the prize, but the protagonist refuses and leaves in frustration because Giulio let him win. However, the musketeer interrupts them as they are being called. It turns out that Giulio is their companion, and he only wanted to test Sato's strength because they will form a team. The reason is that the Pope from Giulio's country, Romelia, is concerned about the war with Albion and offered Giulio's help to end it. The protagonist realizes that the Queen is gathering all her reliable forces in the Academy, which could affect them just as the professor said. However, the Queen only wants them to lend their power to maintain peace, so the protagonist agrees. Giulio continues to court Louise and Saito separates them, starting a fight with Louise for blushing at Giulio's words. Meanwhile, in Albion, Sheffield, the one who killed Cromwell, blames the kingdom of Tristan for his murder and incites the people to oppose them and continue the war since she controls the high-ranking officials with the stolen ring. The next day, the protagonist wakes up and accidentally touches Louise's flat chest, causing her to start hitting him. However, her older sister Eleanor appears and takes her home along with Siesta. Louise gets annoyed every time the protagonist talks to Siesta, but her sister scolds her as it's not proper for a lady. She keeps Louise in check during the journey on carriages, but a bump in the road makes the protagonist to hug Siesta, causing the explosive rage of Louise. After arriving at the gigantic mansion, dinner begins and Eleanor believes it makes no sense for Louise to continue attending the Magic Academy since she lacks talent. Louise tries to argue that she has changed and can now help the Queen with her missions, but nobody believes her. Eleanor wants Louise to get married as soon as possible, which leads them to discuss Eleanor's failed engagement, and their mother has to calm them down and postpone the conversation. The protagonist ponders because Louise might have to get married, and Siesta starts to become determined to win him over since she sees some advantages. Meanwhile, Louise can't sleep, and her sister Cadlia suspects that it's because she needs to sleep with her beloved, assuming it's the protagonist. This makes Louise nervous and she tries to deny it, but Cadlia realizes the truth, so Louise goes to Sato's room. She sees someone in his bed, so she enters and kisses the person. But when she touches the person's chest and realizes it's soft, she discovers it's Siesta. Siesta washes her hands, saying that it was Saito who called her to his room, leaving Louise shocked. Meanwhile, the protagonist was looking for Louise's room but gets confused and enters Eleanor's room. She is having a dream where she reconciles with her ex-fiancé, so she hugs him. When the protagonist's hands touch her chest and realizes it's a little bigger, he realizes it's Eleanor, and she gets angry. The protagonist attempts to justify himself only make it worse, and she hits him. At the same time, Louise ends up very hurt. The next day, Louise's father arrives, and due to the ongoing war, he sees no point in his daughter wasting time at the Magic Academy. He asks her to come back home and find a husband. However, Cadlia tries to advocate for her, as it's too sudden. Then their mother wonders if there's someone she likes, causing Louise to deny it. But she blushes like a tomato, making Eleanor and her mother imagine the worst, and Louise runs off. Cadlia visits the protagonist and tells him where Louise is hiding so that he can find her and escape together, as she knows their feelings for each other. The protagonist follows her advice, but Louise doesn't want to leave because she believes the protagonist is interested in Siesta. Saito starts saying all sorts of things, explaining that he is still with Louise despite her being selfish, flat-chested, and many other things because the only reason is that he loves her. And he continues to tell her that she madly loves her. Wow. Louise doesn't believe him at first, but he swears it's true. So Louise lets the protagonist agrees and he kisses her with the intention to get very intimate. The little boat on which they were navigating ends up at the shore, and they are caught in the act by the entire family. Louise's father's immediate reaction is to order to decapitate our protagonist. The protagonist unleashes his power and evades all the guards. He tells Louise's father that he has nothing to worry about and leaves the palace along Louise with Cadlia's help, escaping in the waiting carriage with Siesta as the driver. Louise confirms once again that he didn't lie to her, but upon learning that he was in Eleanor's room the previous night, she gets angry and beats him up. Meanwhile, Siesta thinks that she is the only one that can make Saito truly happy and that she can beat Louise due to her feminine ways. The next day, they continue with physical defense training, but thanks to their constant requests, they brought a wizard from the National Academy to help them. It's Eleanor. It turns out that the Queen found out that her father tried to imprison her, so she asked her sister to help and keep an eye on the protagonist to ensure nothing happens. Cadlia also joined as an assistant because she couldn't leave her little sister alone, so Louise is now happy that her sisters have come. In the evening, the protagonist has to unpack Louise's sister's underwear, so Siesta offers to help her. She had never worn such delicate underwear before, so she tries one on for the protagonist to judge. However, Louise enters, and upon realizing that Siesta is there, she tries to shoo him away. But then, an explosion is heard, and it turns out there was a robbery in the director's office. The musketeers will take care of it, so they send everyone to their rooms but ask the protagonist to stay. The director explains what happened and managed to mark the thief, but she escaped because she was very agile. This thief was after the queen's rings, but the ones she took were fake, as the real ones were kept out of the country where they were safer. However, they conclude that there is a spy in the academy. They split up to check everyone since the mark left by the director is not easy to remove. The protagonist has to check Louise's sisters, so he sneaks into Eleanor's room and confirms she doesn't have anything. However, she wakes up and asks him for his last words since she won't forgive what he did. After receiving a beating, he has to check Catlia, but before he can confirm anything, Louise enters and takes the protagonist away to punish him. However, before she can whip him, an explosion is heard, supposedly from the thief entering Catlia's room and using an explosion to escape. She ends up burning her chest, so they treat her burn, and Agnes finds it suspicious that she got burned right where she should have the mark. They explain the situation, and Giulio also suspects Catlia, which angers Louise as they did all this behind her back. But the vice captain of the Musketeers finds the rings in Catlia's luggage, so supposedly the case is solved. Louise still doesn't believe it, but Eleanor appears and finds a hair at the scene. She uses a potion that will return the hair to its owner, and it ends up on the vice captain's head. She denies being the thief, so Agnes asks her to prove it by showing her chest, and she tries to attack Agnes, but the protagonist stops her and manages to disarm her. The vice captain tries to escape using magic, but is cornered by Catlia's golem, and Agnes breaks her wand. Agnes interrogates her, and it turns out she holds resentment against the crown because her father was dismissed due to betrayal by the nobles. Agnes went through a similar situation, but she doesn't believe that's the way to solve it. So she asks her to confess who was giving her orders, and she only says it was a friend of her father. Agnes pieces together the puzzle as she was informed about her father's case and hypothesizes that this person called Richemont was the one who betrayed her father. On the other hand, Louise makes it clear to the protagonist that she hasn't forgotten everything he did last night and ends up whipping him. The next day, Agnes submits her report to the queen, but they can't arrest Richemont since the testimony of a plebeian would have no effect in the royal court. They will take another approach. Agnes is worried because she could be in danger, but she has a good bodyguard. Agnes is very grateful to the queen for allowing her to gain a position despite being a plebeian, and now she can seek revenge. On the other hand, Louise was summoned by Agnes to the tavern where they once worked, and they are rehearsing for a play there. However, they are short-staffed and ask for their help for tonight. The protagonist starts rating the size of the actress's breasts, and Louise discovers it, ready to hit him if it weren't for Giulio, who wants Louise to attend to him. The protagonist is jealous and later goes out to take out the trash, but he encounters the queen, who is fleeing. She asks him for help to be her bodyguard, and Saito agrees, but he has to disguise himself, so she gives him Louise's uniform, although it is too small due to his large chest. They try to hide, but security is tight, so the princess uses reverse psychology, and instead of hiding, they let people see the protagonist going with her as a couple so that the guards don't question them. Saito is pretty happy because he gets to follow the queen. Meanwhile, Agnes goes to Richemont's house to inform him about the kidnapping of the queen and asks for authorization to search for her freely. He complies with everything she says, but Agnes asks him about the incident in her village, which was completely burned down. However, Richemont changes the subject, stating that she shouldn't worry about things from the past when the queen is in trouble. The protagonist and the queen stay in a humble room as she's freezing, so he has to share his warmth. But the guards come to inspect, and the queen has no choice but to pretend they are about to engage in an intimate act to make the guards pass by without asking questions. Richemont starts mobilizing his men, and Agnes follows him but runs into Louise, who is looking for the protagonist. She takes her along and overhears Richemont planning to meet the Albion spy due to the queen's kidnapping. Louise can't help but scream upon hearing this, so Agnes has to cover up the situation with a kiss. The queen explains to the protagonist that they faked the kidnapping to make Richemont make his move and catch him red-handed. On the other hand, Agnes explains everything in detail and heads to the theater, ordering the protagonist to stay, but Scarin takes her with him as they have a play to perform. At the theater, Louise meets the protagonist since the queen is now under Agnes' care. The play begins, and Richemont was giving orders to the spy, but the queen overhears the conversation and accuses him of treason, attempting to arrest him. However, he is not defenseless and orders his men to kill the queen. A big fight ensues, and the protagonist jumps in to defend the queen. Richemont decides to escape since this theater is his property and has several secret exits, but Agnes was already waiting for him here as she wants to kill him for burning down her village without reason. Richemont manages to distract her with a lie and tries to burn her, but she emerges from the flames and impales him with her sword, ensuring he rots in hell, completing her revenge. On the other hand, Louise, as usual, interrogates the protagonist to find out what he was doing with the princess, since she can smell their scent on him. He gets nervous remembering everything that happened, but he turns the question back to her, and she's in the same situation. Nonetheless, she gets angry anyway, as a familiar should not doubt her mistress. The next day, they advise the queen to officially declare war, as otherwise the opposition groups could stage a coup and continue the war without any limits. She is forced to accept this recommendation. In the first week, everything seems to be going wonderfully, making Louise happy, but not the protagonist, although his mood changes when he sees a sailor uniform. Meanwhile, Agnes is upset because the director refuses to open the lock of the underground library as it is very old and could be dangerous. However, there are documents that record the attack on her hometown, so she asks for Chulio, and the protagonist help to enter. The protagonist agrees, but Louise is not good with magic, so she cannot open any locks, which annoys her. Nevertheless, they need someone who can, so they ask for Eleanor's help and head to the library. Sesta sees them and follows them because the entrance is through the women's bathroom, which seems strange to her. Eleanor manages to open the door, but the professor finds them and tries to stop them. However, Agnes ignores him, and since the students are following her, she has no choice but to continue. They keep walking but hear someone coming from behind, and it turns out to be Siesta, who accidentally reveals that she gave the sailor uniform to herself because she has breasts, unlike Louise. This angers Louise, and she casts a spell that causes a collapse. They can't go back, so they move forward. The professor finds the protagonist's world interesting, where there are no wars and young people can enjoy a peaceful life. But Agnes doesn't agree. She believes they should educate them to be willing to serve their country in war. The professor gets upset, thinking she only says that because she doesn't know war, even though he doesn't know it either. What Agnes experienced as a child was a massacre led by Richmond to gain a reputation for killing rebels who oppose the kingdom. The professor is concerned about Agnes because revenge is all she thinks about, and he believes that being so young, she should enjoy life more. But she doesn't care. They arrive at the library, and there's a warning that magic cannot be used as it would result in everyone's death. However, Eleanor doesn't believe such a thing exists, so they enter and start searching through the documents. Louise manages to find where the massacre was described, and Agnes begins investigating. Meanwhile, Siesta accidentally drops some books, and Eleanor picks them up using magic, triggering the anti-theft spell that causes the library to collapse. Agnes refuses to leave without finding out the name of the captain, but to her misfortune, it's not written in that book. Agnes doesn't give up, but it's too late as a book hits her heel. The professor has to help her get out, and Agnes is grateful to him for saving her life. Agnes tells them what she read, and it seems that the captain who ordered the massacre is still alive, and he took the page from the records because his name didn't appear. But they have to get out first to continue investigating. They remember that Louise caused a collapse, so they send Siesta to flirt with the protagonist so that Louise can open the way. Meanwhile, we are introduced to Menville, who was involved in the massacre of Agnes's village, and now he is assigned the mission to destroy the Magic Academy. Going back to the protagonists, Eleanor kidnaps Louise and locks her up in a dungeon because she found out that Agnes will depart with the queen to fight on the front lines, and she also wanted to enlist. The protagonist informed Eleanor about this to stop her. Louise feels betrayed, but the protagonist agrees that she shouldn't go, and even the professor doesn't think the Academy's students should witness the atrocities of the past, so he asks Agnes to reconsider her decision. At that moment, Menville arrives with his men to invade the Academy, and since it's full of women, his men plan to do inappropriate things, but Menville forbids it, stating that it doesn't matter if it's a man or a woman, they will die either way. The invasion begins and they manage to enter, but Agnes and some musketeers defeat those who attempted to kidnap her, as well as Tabitha, who realizes it with Kerchi. The professor also notices something is happening and goes to investigate, while the protagonist stays with Louise. It turns out that everyone has been kidnapped and gathered in the dining hall. Although the director and Louise's sisters offer themselves as hostages to free the others, Menville refuses, as they are all better hostages to make the queen reconsider her decision about the war. The musketeers surround the building and demand the release of the hostages while preparing for a surprise entry, but Menville refuses and prematurely detonates the musketeers' bombs. As Menville wants to start killing the hostages to prove he's serious, the musketeers intervene, but he melts their weapons with his fire magic. Meanwhile, the professor sends a distress letter, and the protagonist frees Louise to join the battle. Returning to Agnes, she plans not to lose against someone who needs hostages, but Menville dislikes the idea, as his style is to burn everything, just like he did with Agnes's village. Agnes gets angry upon hearing this, but Menville melts her sword, rendering her powerless. Meanwhile, the protagonist encounters Kerch and Tabitha, who want to help the hostages, although the professor also appears to try to stop them since they are facing professionals and could lose their lives. Kirka refuses to run away as she hates cowards. Meanwhile, Agnes asks Menville if he was the captain of the massacre, but she is surprised to hear that he wasn't because there was a man nicknamed the Fire Serpent who had even more destructive power than Menville, and he claims that the scar on his face was made by that man. He is also looking for him to get revenge. The professor agrees to help the hostages, but will do so with a carefully planned strategy, so he asks them to wait. Meanwhile, Menville explains that his captain had the power to burn down the entire village in an instant, but he wanted to know more about how strong he was. That's why he attacked him from behind, which resulted in him getting burned. The protagonist starts making origami to help the hostages, and meanwhile, the professor confesses to him that he wants to go to the protagonist's world because he is fascinated by the idea of technology being shared among everyone. Kerchi can no longer bear the weight, but just as she arrives, the professor appears, and at that moment, Menville asks the director to inform the queen to stop the invasion of Albion, or else he will kill all the students. However, the professor uses origami to stun everyone. Kirch and Tabitha try to defeat Menville and his men, but the villain defeats them with a single attack. The professor has to defend them, and Menville recognizes him because those flames belong to the fire serpent. Agnes is left speechless upon hearing this. The professor orders the protagonist and Louise to help the students escape while he fights Menville. However, Agnes refuses to leave the dining hall because she wants revenge for her burned village and her family. She tries to attack the professor, but Menville attempts to kill her to prevent any interruptions. He realizes that the professor is trying to protect her, so he uses her as bait, and the professor ends up sacrificing himself for Agnes. Agnes is left unsure of what to do as she notices the same scar on the man who rescued her as a child. The professor, with his last bit of strength, continues to attack Menville, who, seeing the weak strikes, grows overconfident. Seizing this arrogance, the professor strikes him with a powerful attack. Menville becomes angry because the blow hurt him, so he tries to retaliate with even greater force. Agnes takes advantage of this and kills him while performing her spell. She is confused and wonders why the man who burned her village is the same one who saved her. The professor explains that he made a mistake. When he burned the village, he was informed that there was no trace of a plague, so he rushed to save the only surviving girl. Regardless, Agnes still wants to kill the professor, but the students intervene, though he believes she has every right to do so. He asks her that after she does it, she should never kill again. Agnes becomes upset, as he has no right to ask that of her, and attempts to kill him, but Louise stops her, as the professor has already died. Everyone mourns, and Agnes goes through the professor's belongings, where she finds a letter for the protagonist. In the letter, the professor wanted to ensure that even if the protagonist goes to war, he doesn't adopt the habit of killing people, and he also asked him to return to his world, the world he wanted to go to so badly. Days later, the Queen summons Louise to Albion because they plan to invade its capital. To avoid civilian casualties, they ask Louise to take charge of their troops using magic, just as she did with the warship. Louise accepts as she wants to please the Queen. The protagonist disagrees because he doesn't want to kill humans, but he accompanies her anyway. Louise tries to cast the spell, but she fails because, according to Delfliner, she used up all the magic she had accumulated over 10 years in the spell she used in Tristane. It's not magic that can be used so freely. Louise wants to try again, but the Albion Knights spot them, so they try to shoot them down with their dragons. The protagonist hesitates to kill them, so he only incapacitates them. But this distraction leads to their plane crashing. The protagonist has to build a shelter in the snow, so he becomes exhausted and nearly freezes to death. Louise, upon seeing him collapse, follows the protagonist's advice and warms him through direct contact. The next morning, he wakes up refreshed, but Louise doesn't want him to know, so she silences Delfinger. Sheffield learns about the protagonist's attack and the advancing Tristane troops, so he orders a retreat of his men and all the food from the village, hoping to make their stay in the capital difficult when they arrive. Meanwhile, the protagonist sees one of the fallen Albion Knights and attacks them as soon as he can, but he gets injured and passes out. Louise carries him away because leaving a wounded man to die would bring dishonor to her family. This knight's name is Henry, and as soon as he wakes up, he tries to kill the protagonist, but the protagonist pushes him away and tells him that he won't kill him. Henry thinks it's a matter of honor, but the protagonist denies it because he doesn't belong to any royal family. He just wants to live and keep Louise alive. Henry calms down upon hearing this and pretends to be asleep as he has witnessed the protagonist and Louise fighting quite a bit. Louise is worried because she doesn't know how to explain her failure in the mission, but the protagonist only wants her to tell the truth since there's no need to commit suicide to avoid dishonor. However, Louise would prefer that over admitting her failure in a mission entrusted to her by the Queen herself. Henry is surprised that such a young member of a Tristane family is so honorable, so he introduces himself and doesn't resist them. Henry is amazed by the plane since it's faster than his dragon, which died saving his life. The protagonist apologizes for what he did, but Henry doesn't see a reason for an apology since they're in a war, and the protagonist disagrees because he doesn't want to. He only wants to protect those he loves. What if they order him to kill, he would refuse. This makes Henry wish he could live that way since others prefer to abandon the people they love for the sake of honor. The protagonist realizes he's talking about himself and finds it foolish to separate from the person he loves. This upsets Henry because if he's going to die anyway, it would have been right to cancel his marriage. The protagonist believes he is the worst of all because he should want to live no matter what to be able to return to his beloved, and Louise thinks the same since one should only think about in their final moments. They agree to do everything possible to stay alive. They hear a gunshot, so they allow Henry to join his comrades, and he pays off his debt to them by saying that the protagonists land on the other side of the mountain. However, Giulio is in the area searching for the protagonists in a very extravagant way, so they almost get shot to pieces. They arrive at the palace and Louise apologizes for her failure. She wants to be punished, so she offers to undertake the most dangerous missions they have, which worries the protagonist because she should try to survive instead of protecting her honor. They manage to reach the capital, but Louise believes that the people of Albion have no honor since they welcome the invaders with open arms. However, the protagonist sees it differently. Not only were they abandoned, but they were also left without food, and Tristane shared their supplies, so it makes sense for them to be on good terms with Tristane. However, Louise is unconvinced and believes it's a plebeian mentality. Louise goes to see the Queen and leaves the protagonist to his own devices. The queen gives her another mission, which involves observing Albion's castle to see if they are preparing for a surprise attack. Louise accepts and goes to see the protagonist. But since they are quarreling, she ends up asking Giulio for help, and he gladly agrees. The protagonist goes to the village and encounters Siesta, who came to help her uncle with his business. However, it turns out her uncle is Scarin. Siesta actually came to find the protagonist, as she has now clearly an unrequited love for him. Meanwhile, the nobles of Albion consider surrender as an option since they don't have enough soldiers to attack. However, Sheffield spots Giulio and Louise riding on his dragon, and they attack them. Giulio defends himself and takes down the Albion knights. Meanwhile, the protagonist is having dinner with Siesta and her family, and Jessica is surprised that the protagonist has won over her cousin. The protagonist, on the other hand, is more surprised that both of them have such large peculiarities, although Scarin says it's a common trait. Meanwhile, Louise is upset because Saito distanced himself from her. Delflinger shows her his perspective, explaining that after she mistreated him, it's normal for him to distance himself. The protagonist comes from a world where there are no nobles or plebeians, so Delflinger recommends that Louise declare her love since the protagonist stayed for her, but all he received was mistreatment. Louise doesn't like the idea, so Delflinger has the brilliant idea of switching roles so that she can understand the protagonist better. She dresses up as a cat for the protagonist, but he doesn't come alone, leaving everyone stunned by her appearance. The protagonist wonders what she wanted to do, and Delflinger tries to explain what happened, but Louise stops him as she doesn't want to admit that she did it for the protagonist. She lies and says she did it to catch Giulio's attention, but to her bad luck, Giulio shows up, and she runs away to avoid being burned. Siesta then dresses up as a bunny to compete with Louise, which angers her, and she ends up removing Siesta's bra, leaving her exposed. On the other hand, Sheffield knows how to defeat Tristane's army, so he casts a spell on the village's lake and then leaves, leaving the general in charge to continue the war. Returning to the protagonists, Gucci believes he saw a fairy who saved his life when he was seriously injured, but no one believes him, thinking it may have been a hallucination. Gitch is convinced of what he saw and also isn't afraid of death since, as a noble, it would be an honor to die in battle. But this annoys the protagonist because instead of appreciating his life, Gitch only talks about dying for honor. Louise becomes upset because honor is the most important thing for a noble, and all she wants is to serve the queen. She would die if the queen asked her to. The protagonist gets angry and leaves her to do as she pleases. Delflinger tries to calm him down by telling him the truth, but Siesta catches up to him, thinking she's the reason for his anger, although that's not the case. He takes her to an inn so she doesn't freeze. Meanwhile, the soldiers drink from the wells and fall under a spell that turns them rebellious, and they try to kill the queen. Agnes gives the warning when they attack the headquarters, but it's too late as a fireball hits them, and the queen nearly get hit, but Agnes saves her. General Poultier is killed in the explosion. The protagonist wants to go and help, but Siesta doesn't want him to die while being reckless because of Louise. For that, she gives him a potion to make her fall asleep in case she wants him to do something too dangerous. Louise is attacked by the guards and almost dies if it weren't for the protagonist, who appears at the last moment to save her. The next day, Agnes explains the reason for the rebels among their troops, and the cardinal asks the queen to retreat since there is an attack from Albion that they won't be able to stop. However, the queen refuses as she wants to ensure the safety of the people first. Hours later, Louise informs the protagonist that she will act as bait to buy time, as the cardinal secretly asked her to do so, giving the queen time to escape. The protagonist is very worried since it's a suicide mission, but Louise believes that if she uses void magic, she could stand against Albion's troops. However, the protagonist has no faith in that plan since it didn't work the last time. The protagonist becomes upset again and tries to reject the mission, but Louise isn't doing it just for her honor. If the army invades, many people they know will be hurt, so the protagonist accepts that she should carry out the mission and plans to have a farewell with Louise by granting her a wish while drinking. And then she asks him to marry her as a farewell wish. Wow. Louise becomes nervous, but they proceed with the preparations and hold the ceremony at the church with flowers they bought at the market. But then we see that the protagonist actually doesn't want Louise to carry out the mission. He uses Siesta's potion on her drink, and they begin the ceremony by expressing their true feelings. The more genuine love they show, the more the flowers bloom, and Louise declares her love, but then faints due to the potion's effects. We can hear the tearful voice of Saito too. The protagonist tries to take her to a safe place, but Giulio was spying on them, not wanting them to die. He takes Louise, and the protagonist says goes to stop Albion's soldiers. It turns out that after hearing Louise being so sincere, he feels like he would betray her if he doesn't do something to fulfill her mission. Meanwhile, the queen, upon learning that Louise will act as bait, tries to save her, but the cardinal convinces her to stay. The protagonist fights against the hypnotized soldiers, and Louise wakes up on the ship looking for Saito. However, Giulio tells her what he did, and she tries to jump off to fight alongside the protagonist, but it's too late. The protagonist makes his way to Albion's army and knows that he will probably die. but he still goes to fight since he promised Louise. Despite defeating many enemies, they manage to bring him down after numerous spells and attacks, and Louise realizes from the flower they created that the protagonist's life is about to end. The Albion army shows no mercy and tries to finish him off. Days later, everyone is depressed due to the protagonist's, especially the queen, who blames herself. Eleanor tries to get Louise to stop grieving, being a pretty cold sister, saying that only her familiar, which angers Louise and make her cry even more since he meant everything to her. She asks to be left alone and looks at the flower, but suddenly comes back to life. She goes out running outside the academy and confirms it. Saito is still alive. She runs to hug him and confirm that she's not seeing a ghost. It turns out a fairy saved him and took care of him when he was near, although he says out loud that this fairy had large breasts, which makes Louise jealous, and they return to their usual routine, causing explosions everywhere. Season 3. We begin this season with Saito on top of Louise, both lying in bed, and our young man seems ready for everything to happen. However, she says that first, it's too bright and early, and secondly, they have to ask permission from the ancestors. In other words, yes, but not right now. To make matters worse, Siesta enters the room as if it were her own, shouting good morning and interrupting the previous atmosphere. But then Louise screams because she realizes that the protagonist's mark has disappeared. The war ended, so they observe a moment of silence, and Kirch shouts to the four winds that the protagonist no longer has the mark. Everyone is surprised because contracts should be eternal, and this means he is now a common plebeian. Kirka tries to take Louise to her house to rest and get away from the protagonist, but she still considers him special, so she refuses. However, the queen summons them both to her palace, so they go. Meanwhile, Louise wonders if he will leave now that he is free, so the protagonist gets annoyed because she must be very cold to think that way. In reality, she's thinking about protagonist, but she feels embarrassed to admit it. Louise gets upset about this conversation they had, so she goes to the forest alone and is attacked by Sheffield and her familiars. Sheffield tells her that she is not the only void user and that there is not just one Gandalfr, as she is one too. Sheffield wants to take Louise with her, so Louise creates an explosion to get the protagonist's attention, and he rushes to save her. The protagonist tells her to use void magic while he defends her, but he realizes that without her mark, it's too difficult. However, Delflinger encourages him, as he once fought an entire army alone. The protagonist defeats several monsters, but almost dies if it weren't for Agnes, who also arrives to help. Sheffield realizes that the protagonist is no longer a familiar, so her master, named Joseph, asks her to retreat. Louise finishes off the monsters, and then they go to the palace to report. The queen awards the protagonist a noble title for saving the kingdom in that battle, but he refuses because he lost the power of his mark and is now a normal human. The queen wonders why this happened, and Delflinger believes it's because his heart stopped and the elf who helped him had to literally revive him. Perhaps the contract ended when he died. The queen sends for this elf named Tifania, and thanks to Delflinger, they have a rough idea of where she lives. However, Louise doesn't want the protagonist to go because if they are attacked again, he won't be able to defend himself. The protagonist is pensive because now that he is no longer a familiar, he has no reason to get involved with this new enemy. However, Louise goes up to the rooftop with him because she dreamt that she abandoned him. She starts crying because she's afraid the protagonist will disappear and she'll never see him again. So the protagonist wants to try renewing the contract. The protagonist realizes that no matter if he is not her familiar, he loves her, and that's what matters most. Louise gets nervous and tries to deny that she loves him, but the protagonist insists as they even promise to do the deed. Though he is persistent, she tells him to buzz off and punishes him for being so lascivious. The next morning, she is still pissed and calls him Waterflea, while also not letting him hop on the carriage. Poor guy. They set off to find the elf, and Louise is still making the protagonist run, but they encounter Siesta, who wants to join them and cook for them. They allow her to join. She sticks close to the protagonist, which annoys Louise, but Siesta knows that the protagonist is a free man, so now it's his decision whom to be with. They stop to rest as night falls, but Louise is still upset, so she goes to bed early. Then Agnes makes some wooden swords for the protagonist to practice with and see how much he has improved. They train for several hours until the protagonist remembers some moves he used to do. Agnes stops, and also because Louise seemed worried. The next day, they search the surroundings to see if they can find Tifania's home, but the protagonist manages to recognize her among the trees, so he runs to catch up with her. Tifania tries to escape, but when she sees that it's the protagonist, she jumps into his arms. Louise and Siesta are left in shock because she has quite the assets, so Louise scolds them for greeting each other that way when they are practically strangers. Louise starts losing her temper, so the protagonist stops her, which makes her even more upset. She storms out to curse the protagonist, but realizes she's being too toxic because he's the one who saved her life and she didn't listen to the story the protagonist lived with Tifania. Siesta goes to look for Louise and convinces her to come back, joining forces to defeat Tifania. However, Sheffield attacks them to make them ask for help from another void familiar. Louise doesn't know what she's talking about, so she defends herself as best she can against the wolves, and the protagonist feels that Louise needs help. He runs to find her, although Delflinger has doubts because he is risking too much by fighting as a normal human. Louise tries to perform one last spell out of desperation, so she performs the summoning ritual again, asking with all of her heart for Saito to come out, and it happens. Sheffield can't believe that the same familiar has been summoned twice, so she retreats and Louise completes the contract again, making the protagonist a Gandalfr once more. Sheffield informs her master, Joseph, about it, and he decides to wait. On the other hand, the protagonist tells everyone that he has become Louise's familiar again, but she acts all tsundere-like, treating him like a dog. However, this time, she plays along and he starts barking at her. The next day, they set off for the capital, and Tiffania is a little scared since she has never been away from the forest, but she believes it's time to see the world. Several days later, they arrive in Tristane and present themselves to the queen. Tiffania doesn't take off her hat because she has elf ears. Everyone is surprised, and Tiffania thinks that now they will discriminate against her because she is a half-elf born out of an affair. However, the queen doesn't care about her origin and offers her protection. Louise reports Sheffield's attack as she is searching for another void user, so the queen asks for discretion to gather information among the nobles, as it is not normal for Sheffield to go unnoticed despite her strength. Meanwhile, Joseph plans to let the kingdoms divide Albion to satisfy his greed because he doesn't care about those things. Back with the queen, she asks Tiffania if she knows anything about the void users, although she seems to have no idea what they are talking about. Tiffania shows them the ring she used to revive the protagonist as Delflinger transported him to the forest at the last moment, and that's where Tiffania used the magic of the gem to bring him back to life. The queen believes that someone half-elf like her could use magic, even void magic, but this brings back bad memories for Tiffania, so she refuses and runs away. Joseph starts hearing a music box that should be connected to another void user, and the protagonist wakes up because he hears Tiffania singing. She feels a bit lonely because she's always been in her forest, and she's also scared because she knows she can use magic, but she did it when her mother was killed by the army, so remembering those moments is very painful. The protagonist believes that she has her powers for a reason, so he plans to support her in whatever is necessary. Tiffania is overjoyed to have him as a friend, although the protagonist remembers how Louise would react to them being so close, so he says, yeah, and goes to sleep. The next day, the protagonist is appointed a knight of the kingdom, and thanks to the queen, Siesta becomes his official servant, which makes Louise jealous. The queen informs them that Tiffania is their cousin, so she will stay at the castle for now, but she wants her to visit the academy whenever she wants. This annoys Louise because the queen is being too kind to Tiffania, but the queen trusts that someday Louise will fully accept Tiffania. Louise clarifies her intentions because Tiffania's attitude is too timid to survive in an environment like the academy, so she must first gain confidence. However, she also thanks Tiffania for saving Saito's life. Hours later, they arrive at the academy and all the students are waiting to congratulate the protagonist on his promotion to a knight. He is welcomed into the school's Order of Knights as their vice captain, as it is the path all men aspire to follow. Good for him. Days later, Tiffania enters the academy and goes to greet the protagonist, but ends up falling chest first into him. Louise is shocked and mad as always. The next day, the protagonist tries to leave early to practice sword fighting, but Louise gets upset because he didn't ask for permission and wants them to spend more time together like before. So the protagonist agrees to come back early. Tiffania becomes very popular and all the boys try to give her hats as gifts. However, since she can't take off the hat she's wearing because it would reveal that she's an elf, she has to run and ends up colliding with the princess of Goldenhorf named Beatrice, who gets angry. In the afternoon, they corner Tiffania and demand an apology, but as they try to take off her hat, the protagonist jumps in to defend her. Beatrice gets mad and tries to take it out on the protagonist, but Gooch intervenes and reminds her that he's just a lowly knight and she should not address him so much. Beatrice agrees and decides to leave him alone for now. The protagonist is surprised that Gooch lowers his head despite being a noble from a renowned family. Gooch has a lot of respect for Beatrice because she is from the royal family and also commands a squadron of dragon knights, which has the reputation of being the strongest squadron on the continent. Regardless, the protagonist tells Tiffania that he will protect her if anyone bothers her. He goes to Louise's room to ask her for her opinion, but he ignores the NC diner she has already prepared. She gets super mad and buzzes him off. The next day, Louise doesn't want to attend classes and Tiffania decides to reveal that she is an elf to all the students to avoid causing problems for the protagonist. However, everyone gets scared because in the past, elves used to attack humans. Tiffania tells them that she only wants to be their friend, so Beatrice tells her that in order for that to happen, she will have to believe in the same god as them. Tiffania agrees and Beatrice wants to test her, so she kidnaps her with her dragon knights. Beatrice initiates an inquisition because she's a bishop, and as a test of Tiffania's faith, she wants her to enter a boiling cauldron. The protagonist tries to stop this show, but Gooch stops him, saying that you shouldn't interrupt an inquisition. Beatrice gives him another option, which is to leave the academy. Tiffania refuses to leave because she wants to take the opportunity given to her by the protagonist to explore the world. When Beatrice sees her determination, she realizes that it was just a child's tantrum. Beatrice orders them to throw Tiffania into the cauldron. The protagonist intervenes, but knowing that being aggressive would have consequences, he asks politely. However, this doesn't work, and it turns into a fight with all the knights from the academy getting involved. Meanwhile, Louise is having a dream about the protagonist, but before it reaches its climax, she wakes up because of the commotion. She gets up, annoyed, and kicks everyone out. Beatrice tries to intimidate her for interrupting the Inquisition, but Louise exposes her by pointing out that she doesn't have the proper authority to carry it out. Beatrice's friends try to escape, but Tiffania forgives her and asks her to be friends. Beatrice breaks down and starts crying. The director and the teacher apologize to Tiffania for the trouble, but she is happy because now she can make many friends. On the other hand, the protagonist is in the infirmary, waiting for Louise to visit him, but instead, Tiffania visits because she wants the protagonist to check if her breasts seem fake, so she touches him. Meanwhile, Louise hears from Chulio that the protagonist kneeled down to try to resolve everything peacefully, thinking of her. So she goes to visit him, but upon seeing him in such a compromising situation, she whips him with Siesta's approval. The next day, Louise prepares a confession for the protagonist to sign so that he can't touch other breasts in his life. However, the protagonist is fed up with being treated like trash and leaves because he doesn't want to be with a mistress who doesn't trust his familiar. The protagonist goes to the former laboratory of the professor and becomes nostalgic since he used to listen to him and believe everything he told him. After a while, he realizes that all the knights suddenly became popular due to their recent battle. So they tease him because he looks downcast, and even the chubby one becomes the champion. He offers advice to deal with Louise. Louise considers the fact that maybe the protagonist is telling the truth, but she finds it hard to believe that Tiffania asked him to touch her breasts. Meanwhile, the protagonist is depressed, and his friends decide to give him a present. Louise enters the bathroom to clear her mind, but encounters Tiffania, who is surprised by the big difference in their chest size. Meanwhile, Gyuch and the others dig a tunnel to the women's bathroom and bring the protagonist so he can see paradise. This doesn't seem to cheer him up, but he doesn't miss the opportunity either. Louise and Tiffania start touching each other since Tiffania suggested it, and Louise tries to hide her surprise at noticing the difference. Then Tiffania regrets asking the protagonist to touch her breasts. But when Louise hears this, she confirms that the protagonist was telling the truth. She feels terrible for not having trusted him from the beginning. The protagonist can't stand them being seen half-naked by others, so he separates them. As he does, the girls realize they are being watched, and the boys retreat. However, the girls ambush them and punish them one by one. The chubby one gets stuck in the hole, so they try to pull them out to see who is inside. But Tabitha generates a tornado that sends the protagonist flying into the tower, saving him because he had fed her dragon earlier, and she wanted to repay the favor. However, Montmorency enters looking for Gooch, so the protagonist has to hide with Tabitha. But she is so the protagonist starts getting aroused. Luckily, they find Gooch and they are saved. Anyway, Tabitha panics because she is scared of ghosts and faints. The protagonist has to take care of her, but it's complicated because she is naked. The protagonist realizes that all the dolls move on their own and starts thinking that nothing he does to make Louise happy seems to work, and he realizes that touching Tiffania's breasts, even if she asked for it, was a mistake. Louise finds him and confirms that she has been watching him in the bathrooms, but this time she decides to believe his version of the story. However, she is still upset because he shouldn't have touched Tiffania's breasts. The protagonist promises not to touch any other breasts except hers since he prefers them small. To prove it, he is about to kiss her, but Tabitha wakes up and Louise gets angry because it confirms that he likes small breasts. So the next day, she makes him sign a written agreement not to touch any breasts other than hers. Ha! A few days later, Siesta's family disagrees with her being the protagonist's second-hand lover, so they give her a love potion that lasts for a day to gain an advantage. She starts hallucinating about what could happen if she uses it. Louise arrives with the protagonist after punishing him as usual. Siesta complains since she always treats him poorly. Louise tells her not to get involved as it's none of her business, but this time Siesta doesn't keep quiet and triggers Louise's competitive side by implying that she would be a better mistress for the protagonist. As a result, Louise leaves him with Siesta for an hour to witness her suffering. Siesta jumps with joy and takes him to a cabin to tend to his wounds. She attempts to engage in a role-playing game with the protagonist, pretending to be a newly couple. However, her family had been spying on them, so they kick them out and give Siesta several options to start playing the role of newlyweds. However, the protagonist restrains himself and only requests food. Siesta's family convinces her to wear a naked apron, leaving the protagonist speechless. But when he's about to take advantage of the situation, he sees Louise watching him from the window, so he keeps his distance. Nevertheless, it's still too much for him, so he goes to the bathroom. Siesta considers using the love potion to outdo Louise, but it accidentally spills onto Montmorency, and he inhales it, falling in love with Louise. Louise tries to seek help from Chorlot, but she doesn't meddle in love matters, so Montmorency takes Louise to give her a kiss, thus spreading the potion. Louise then gropes Jessica and Tabitha, but the latter rejects them and sends them away. Hearing the commotion, the protagonist uses it as an excuse to leave and finds the girls engaging in intimate activities with each other. However, when they try to engage with Scarin, Louise attempts to grope the protagonist, and he tries to stop her. Scarin wastes no time and tries to kiss the protagonist, who has no choice but to kick him in the groin to free himself. Tiffania runs to the protagonist's aid, and he realizes that the reason they are behaving like this is because they are under a spell. Tiffania uses her magic and frees them from the love potion. Siesta apologizes to everyone since it was her carelessness that caused all of this, but as they don't remember much and don't want to remember, they forgive her with the condition that she won't do it again. At night, Tiffania confesses to the protagonist that her magic is related to forgetfulness, and she's the only one who can use it. On the other hand, Tabitha receives a letter, and Sheffield assigns her the mission of obtaining something very rare in the world for Joseph, which could free her mother's heart. Meanwhile, Siesta starts flirting with the protagonist by sleeping next to him, in front of Louise. This obviously annoys her. Louise orders her to stop, and Siesta challenges Louise to see who will end up with the protagonist. The challenge is that if the protagonist manages to find Louise at the dance the next day, Siesta will give up, but if he doesn't, Siesta gets to be with the protagonist, and Louise accepts out of sheer pride. The next day, the protagonist asks what the dance they were talking about is all about, but some students gossip about a rare dragon that was flying near the academy. Saito tries to tell Louise about it, but he only finds Siesta, who wants to engage in an performance with him. Louise stops them before things get heated and orders the protagonist to find her, even if she disguises herself, so they can continue where they left off some time ago. They start disguising themselves using a magical mirror that transforms them into what their hearts believe is the perfect appearance. Louise disguises herself as Cadlia and waits for the protagonist, but she encounters Tiffania, who greatly admires the protagonist and transforms into him, although her breasts remain the same, resulting in a Saito with a curvaceous figure. On the other hand, the protagonist sees the strange dragon they were talking about flying over the academy, so he goes to inform Louise and is surprised to find her not wearing any disguise. He goes straight to her to claim the prize for the bet. This Louise has no idea what he's talking about, but they end up kissing anyway. Sheffield infiltrates the party and breaks the spell, revealing that the one posing as Louise is actually the queen. The queen admires Louise's determination to do what is right, and she wanted to be like her. The protagonist believes that the queen should be happy with who she is, and they almost kiss again. But Louise appears and cannot hold back her tears. She runs away, and the protagonist tries to chase after her to justify himself. But there's not much he can say, as Louise saw everything. He flees to the forest, but Tabitha stops him from going after her. Sheffield finds Louise and tells her that the protagonist and the queen, the people she trusted the most, betrayed her, which caused her to be controlled by Sheffield during her moments of doubt. The protagonist tries to convince Tabitha to let him pass, but she only wants to fulfill her mission. Sheffield arrives with Louise and tells her that Tabitha serves Gallia, and Tabitha attacks the protagonist with all her might. The protagonist defeats her with the power of his mark, but decides not to kill her as she's a precious friend and he couldn't harm her under any circumstances. Tabitha is moved by this and withdraws, and Louise wakes up from the trance due to the protagonist's shouts. She starts throwing a tantrum because of the kiss he gave the queen and falls off the monster. Fortunately, the protagonist manages to catch her, and to prove that she is the one he wants, he kisses her. However, Sheffield still wants to take her away and summons a bunch of monsters, but the mysterious dragon they were talking about defeats all of them, and it turns out to be a giant airplane with Kerchi in, Professor Colbert. Wow, it wasn't. The next day, everyone celebrates on the professor's new warplane, and he reveals that he completed his research, allowing him to create this machine. However, what concerns the protagonist the most is that the professor was supposed to be dead. In reality, Tabitha used a spell to temporarily stop his heart, and then Kirka rescued him and took him to her home in Germania. The protagonist is lost in thought, unsure if Tabitha is on his side, but Louise arrives and demands further explanations about what happened with the queen. Just then, the queen interrupts them, as she also wanted to congratulate the professor on his great invention. The queen seems very uncomfortable talking to the protagonist, which makes Siesta suspicious. Louise tells her everything that happened, and Siesta considers the battle lost since, according to her books, she could do whatever she wants with him whenever she desires. However, as Siesta got too excited, they are discovered by Tiffania, making Louise nervous. The professor notices the protagonist lost in thought and approaches him to talk about how he inspired him to create the aircraft. Meanwhile, the princess is also lost in thought about the previous night and decides to stay a little longer. On the other hand, Tiffania learns about what's going on and hands Louise a magnifying glass that reveals what a man did the previous night, helping Louise alleviate her anxiety about knowing what happened. They decide to test it, and Delflinger realizes their plan, warning the protagonist to flee as Louise's object can reveal a man's secrets. The protagonist runs away, and a chase ensues on the ship. The protagonist hides in the aircraft's boiler, but Tiffania finds him and subdues him with her ample bosom. Although the protagonist manages to escape, he is captured shortly after. They enter his mind and see that he fought with Tabitha during the night. Louise demands an explanation, so he confesses that Tabitha stopped him while he was being hypnotized. Kirchi then tells him the whole story of Tabitha and her family, as it is likely that she is being threatened by the king of her country. Meanwhile, Tabitha arrives home and finds everything destroyed. Her mother has been taken, but an elf in her room politely asks her to come willingly to Joseph. As Tabitha refuses, he uses force since he is a user of ancient magic and easily defeats Tabitha, despite her dragon's attempts to save her. The protagonist and Louise inform the queen, and Saito asks for permission to go to Gallia and defeat the king who is threatening Tabitha. However, the queen doesn't want him to do something so dangerous and asks for time to gather evidence against the Gallian king, so the whole country can help the protagonist. The protagonist agrees, but Louise is left pensive as she is worried too much about him, although she decides to believe in him. The next day, all the mages and undead knights start searching for evidence that Tabitha betrayed them, but a girl falls from the sky named Ilokoku, whom they will call Illo. She claims to be Tabitha's sister and is looking for the protagonist to ask for help. Louise kicks the protagonist for being unfaithful, and they cover Ilokoku to hear what she wants. It turns out that she is Tabitha's younger sister and wants them to save her. Tabitha was stripped of her knighthood and her mother was kidnapped because she didn't bring Louise with her. However, the knights don't trust her as she could be a spy. The blue-haired girl has a witness who can confirm her identity, so she goes outside and calls Tabitha's dragon before disappearing. The dragon seems to confirm the entire story, but now it seems that the girl is actually a dragon. Could it be true? They all decide to help her, but first they need authorization from the queen. The protagonist encourages Louise to ask for permission. On the other hand, the elf named Bedashel delivers Tabitha to Joseph, who plans to drive her mad just like her mother. However, he allows her some time with her mother. Bedashel also asks them to guard an ancient entrance, as his prophecy states that the true calamity will be unleashed when the 4 void mages appear. But Joseph doesn't agree immediately. Bedashel must become his servant as long as Joseph is alive. They go to the castle, but the queen refuses, fearing that if Tristang knights rescue a captive from Gallia, it could lead to war. So the protagonist decides to renounce his knighthood to go freely without causing trouble. Gitch and the chubby boy do the same, but the queen decides to arrest them to prevent them from doing anything foolish. Tabitha's dragon sees this, and then we see it rushes to inform the school's students, but in its human form. Meanwhile, Gucci is happy because this experience will give him a story to tell the girls, although the chubby boy is worried because they are arrested. However, the protagonist believes that Louise will do everything possible to get them out of there. Louise realizes that she's doing all this for personal reasons and asks the protagonist what he is to her since she saw them together at the dance. The queen tells her that at that moment, she needed someone to be with her as she feels very lonely. Louise marks her territory, stating that despite respecting her feelings, the protagonist is her familiar, and she won't allow him to approach with those intentions. The queen understands how she feels but still wants Louise to help convince the protagonist not to go to Gallia. However, Louise refuses, stating that he's a precious friend to her. She removes her noble mantle, allowing herself to go to Gallia without causing problems for the kingdom. Louise arrives at the cell with the others, and at first they believe she has come to free them. However, they realize they have been locked up. Gooch and the chubby boy panic because now they have no way out, but Louise yells at them, stating that she won't give up easily. On the other hand, Tabitha wakes up and Bedashel tells her that they will drive her mad, just like her mother, but she will be allowed to live her last moments in peace while they prepare the potion. Meanwhile, the protagonist and the others try to escape using the spoon the chubby boy carries, but they realize that the professor took the ship to the capital for a supposed exhibition when in reality they went to rescue them. The protagonists wonder how they knew they were arrested, and Ilokoku has no choice but to reveal that she is Tabitha's familiar, a species of intelligent shape-shifting dragons that were believed to be extinct. The queen captures the ship, and they are being searched for throughout the city. The protagonist and the others go to Scarin's tavern to hide, but they are still trapped. The professor devises a plan. He will act as bait, taking the ship towards Germania. And when everyone is following him, the protagonist and the others will have a clear path to Gallia by land. The students are concerned as it is a dangerous task, but the professor owes Tabitha his life due to her spell. Jessica has an idea to help them. With disguises, they will be less recognizable. They are given outfits to blend in, although the women feel uncomfortable as they are very revealing. Some students want to help the professor, and Siesta also joins as she recognizes that she isn't strong enough to fight in Gallia. They set off. Meanwhile, Joseph approaches the door mentioned by Bedashel and is amazed to find the calamity. As they suspected, the ship is guarded and anchored. The professor has a brilliant idea. Siesta will strip. On the protagonist's side, they encounter checkpoints to prevent them from leaving, but they easily pass through them thanks to their disguises, pretending to be a traveling circus. Returning to the professor, they use Siesta as bait to attract the guards and knock them out. They draw the attention of everyone else, so they have no choice but to repel them with magic. They board the ship and try to set sail with the anchors still attached. The professor uses the full power of the ship to break the anchors and sail at a normal speed to attract the soldiers' attention, allowing the protagonist a clear passage. Sheffield sees this and informs Joseph, who is ecstatic as the Void Mage will come by delivery. However, realizing that they are trying to save Tabitha, he decides to let her see her friends one last time to punish her further. Meanwhile, Tabitha only wishes for her friend's forgiveness, although she doesn't believe it's possible after what she did. On the way, Louise decides to be self-sufficient as she is now a plebeian and must be able to take care of herself. However, she falls and the protagonist has to carry her. To prevent her from thinking that they are helping her, he says that she can only repay him by letting him do as he pleases. On the other hand, the professor is being pursued by the Dragon Knights and is sustaining significant damage. The students want to go out and fight, but the professor doesn't want anyone to get hurt, so he decides to descend. Agnes realizes that there are only 4, and the professor reveals that the protagonists have already crossed the border. However, her first instinct upon realizing that the professor is alive is to try to kill him, although she doesn't because she can't go empty-handed before the queen, so she returns them to the capital. Upon arriving near Tabitha's old house, Kirky investigates using her remarkable skills and discovers where Tabitha was taken. After a few days, they arrive and find out that the castle they want to enter is guarded by 100 soldiers. They come up with a plan to make the guards fall asleep by using alcohol. Kirch, Illo, and Tiffania will perform a provocative dance to entice them to drink the alcohol. Louise becomes upset because she wasn't given any role in the plan. However, Kircher knows they are unaware of the type of enemies they will face, so she and the protagonist have the most important mission. She asks Louise to protect them with her void magic. Later, Delfliner suggests to the protagonist that he cheers up Louise since her magic relies heavily on her emotional state. He goes to see her, but Louise is trying on a dancer's outfit. She tries to seduce the protagonist and he loses control. He puts Louise on the bed and decides not to have any regrets after the plan, so he tries to kiss her. Unfortunately, Future arrives at an inconvenient moment and interrupts the moment. In the afternoon, Kirky approaches the Baron in charge of the castle's security and offers their services of dance and alcohol. The Baron accepts after seeing Louise and makes a special request to Kirky. At night, they begin the dance and everyone is impressed by Kirky's performance. However, poor Louise cannot do much as her attempts to move her breasts only amuse the spectators. Meanwhile, Badashel offers Tabitha the opportunity to come and see the dancers, but she declines as she is not interested. Returning to the protagonists, Kirky discusses the special condition the Baron mentioned. It turns out that Louise is supposed to accompany him alone at some point during the night. Kirky wants to take her place because it would be dangerous to leave Louise alone. However, Louise wants to do something to prove that she can take care of herself, and the others have no choice but to trust her. Confidently, Louise agrees, but when they arrive, she can't stop trembling. To make matters worse, the Baron happens to be a lover of small breasts and tries to touch her at all costs. Louise attempts to make him fall asleep with a potion given by Kirky, but her breasts cannot support him, causing her to drop the potion. The protagonist finds the potion and Tiffania arrives with Tabitha's dragon, who had fainted due to the strain of being in human form. Tiffania realizes it's Louise's bottle, and they rush to help her. They were right to do so, as the Baron was about to take advantage of Louise. He takes her hostage and Tiffania has to use her memory magic to make him unaware of what he's doing, allowing Louise to kick him. Meanwhile, the other girls are discovered by Bidashel. Kirky tries to attack him, but he reflects her attack. The protagonist tries next with the same result. Delfliner reveals that it's ancient magic that reflects any physical or magical attack, but has a weakness: Louise's cancellation spell. Louise starts to cast the spell. In the meantime, the protagonist defends her as best he can until he manages to cover Delfliner with his spell. The protagonist attacks again, this time managing to break Bidashel's shield. However, Tiffania asks for his life to be spared, explaining that the elves don't seek fights without reason. Since Louise agrees, the protagonist spares his life. Everyone goes together to rescue Tabitha and bring her back. Meanwhile, Joseph is with the Calamity, planning to take it for a walk. Louise has a nightmare in which she loses all of her magic. She wakes up frightened and goes to check if she really can't use magic, discovering that she indeed cannot make anything explode. On the other hand, the protagonist sees Tabitha awake, and she begins to read him a story her mother used to read to her. However, at that moment, Louise arrives to tell them the bad news. Tabitha says that then she will protect Saito because she feels indebted to the protagonist for saving her. But she's also clearly in love now. Joseph, meanwhile, is testing a new golem and thinking about Tabitha. The next day, the protagonist has learned a lot about reading thanks to his rune that modifies his skills. Louise becomes even more worried because if she stops being a void mage and the protagonist becomes the familiar of someone else, then his feelings for her might disappear. To make matters worse, the protagonist doesn't know how to support her, leaving Louise sad. When they are about to reach the border, the Calamity Golem named Vormungen appears, controlled by Sheffield. Tabitha tries to stop it since she is supposedly the target, but she can't do anything. Gitch and Kirky try to help, but with no success. The protagonist realizes that Louise is the target and fights to get her away, but she stubbornly refuses to leave. As a result, Sheffield captures her. The protagonist tries to help her but can't penetrate Jormungen's shield. Sheffield tells Louise to use her void powers or she won't be able to win, but Louise refuses because she can't use magic and also because she feels useless now that she cannot join forces or protect Saito. The professor arrives with the airship as reinforcements, but Louise is still trapped. She tries to cast a spell, and the protagonist attacks again, managing to almost hurt Jormungandr this time. The protagonist manages to get Louise on the dragon and scolds her for trying to buy time when she should stay behind, but she feels undeserving of that. Saito hugs her and she drops some tears of joy. After landing, they use the famous spear, or the artillery gun. Saito touches it to learn how to use it, and they fire the golem with no effect. With no apparent exit, Kirch and the other mages start to fire at the monster in order to debilitate it. Meanwhile, Louise is facing a confidence breakdown and yells at Saito, telling him that he is only interested in her because of her lineage and void powers. Before he can answer, Tabitha intrudes and says that then she will take Saito for her, and that she will be her knight, and kisses him. Wow. Louise becomes extremely upset because she doesn't want the protagonist to leave her side after everything they've been through. She starts channeling a lot of magic, and Tabitha manages to signal her to cast a spell. They fire the projectile again, but this time with Louise's cancellation magic causing Jormungandr to explode. Joseph sees this from a distance and is fascinated by Louise's immense power. The protagonist returns to the airship. Several hours later, Louise wakes up, and the protagonist assures her that he loves her and will continue to do so even if he is no longer her familiar. He asks her if she feels the same, but she switches to Tsundere mode, pretending that she only cares because he is her familiar. However, she uses it as an excuse to kiss him and ask him to return the favor. They arrive in the capital, expecting the queen to punish them for entering Gallia's territory. Instead, she appoints Louise as part of the royal family and restores her noble title as her sister. She is now the second in line to the throne. It is a happy ending, but now Tabitha is also attached to the protagonist, and Louise tries to dismiss him once again. However, this time Tabitha takes him away to protect him from any harm. One day, the director stumbled upon something from the protagonist's world, which were bathing suits. The protagonist then explains how to use them, causing the director to blush. As a result, he organizes a trip to the beach. However, the traditional bathing suits turn out to be practically regular clothes, leaving the protagonist feeling deceived. The director uses the excuse of performing a water spirit dance and presents the bathing suits as traditional attire. The girls don't seem very excited because the swimsuits are too revealing for them. So the director asks the queen to set an example, and she innocently agrees, thinking it's for a ritual. The director starts splashing water on them, mimicking the steps of the ritual, and all the girls begin to have fun. Although the director tells the knights that he has even more revealing swimsuits and plans for some of the girls to wear them, they inform everyone that they will choose the chosen ones to perform the offering ritual. So they organize competitions like watermelon smashing, which doesn't go very well, and a volleyball tournament. However, they want Tiffania to win due to her prominent figure, so the referee shamelessly favors her team, allowing them to reach the finals. But they are disappointed because they wanted Kirchi to be the other finalist, but she lost to Montmorency and Louise. At night, Louise tries to go for a walk with the protagonist, but he ignores her because he has a meeting to finalize the details of the winner's outfit for the next day. Louise overhears them and discovers that everything is planned by the men and the director. The following day, the finalists pretend to be too injured to play, leading to the cancellation of the game. Later, they call each person one by one to subdue and punish them for creating such chaos based on their perverted thoughts. They dress them in the bathing suits they had planned to give to the winner and leave them abandoned in the water. Meanwhile, the girls continue playing on the beach. However, Louise feels someone touching her private parts as a giant octopus appears, behaving just like an Tabitha tries to use her magic to scare away the octopus, but cannot use powerful spells as they might harm the girls. Consequently, she ends up getting trapped. The protagonist manages to free himself from the restraints and begins cutting off the octopus tentacles piece by piece, rescuing all the girls. He takes advantage of these tentacles to cook them in a Japanese style. However, the girls had left out of curiosity to try on the bathing suits that the director had as a prize. They leave without notifying anyone because they didn't want to be seen. The protagonist goes to look for them and sees everything. To make matters worse, Louise's bra falls off because it's too big for her. Season 4. We begin the final season in Louise's room, where she sleeps with Saito and Siesta. The protagonist is dreaming about Louise, which makes her feel flattered. However, unconsciously, he touches her breasts and calls them the Great Plains. This angers Louise, but this time it doesn't work because Tabitha is still protecting him as her knight. Siesta was only pretending to be asleep, so she starts fighting with Louise. The protagonist tries to calm them down, but when he admits that bigger is better, Louise sends him flying. In the hall, Saito meets with Professor Colbert because they have a school trip to Romalia. That's the country where they worship their god. Then everyone is called by the queen. However, Tiffania is a bit scared because being half-elf, she might face some rejection. The protagonist reassures her, saying that he will defend her, which makes his waifus jealous. When they arrive, they are greeted by Giulio, who takes the protagonist, Louise, Tiffania, and the professor to the cathedral, where the queen is waiting for them. The Pope of Romalia, named Vittorio, reveals to them that Tiffania is a void mage and he himself is a void mage too. They will have to join forces with the fourth, Joseph, as there is only one reason why the 4 void mages have appeared. A catastrophe is about to occur. Vittorio offers both of them the role of his priestesses. He gives them some time to think, but Louise doesn't need it and accepts right away. The boys celebrate, and in this bar, there's a mysterious group that starts moving. The protagonist doesn't want to ally with Joseph because he hurt Tabitha too much, but the protagonist is even more upset because Louise acts too friendly with Vittorio. This angers Louise, and on top of that, the protagonist involves Tifania in the conversation, and Louise kicks him out. Tifania was with the queen, who gives her the ring that belonged to the Prince of Albion since she is his familiar. Later, Tifania meets with the professor and asks for his help in summoning her familiar. Meanwhile, Louise notices some suspicious people, and the protagonist goes with Siesta, who helps him understand that Louise couldn't do anything right before, but now she can save the world. So it's normal for her to act that way. The protagonist rushes to her, but Louise had followed those people who turned out to be thieves, and they capture her. The protagonist hears her plea for help and rushes to her aid. One of the thieves escapes, and the other stays to fight the protagonist. Meanwhile, Tifania is performing her summoning spell, and the protagonist is almost defeated by the thief, but Louise sends him flying. The protagonist is also sent flying and ends up falling through the portal that Tifania opened for her familiar. But nobody notices, and all they see is the protagonist landing on Tifania's chest. The next day, Louise and the protagonist get affectionate and Tifania appears, so Louise tries to deny everything. However, Tifania had a different impression since she thought she saw the protagonist coming out of her summoning portal. The next day, Saito is happily strolling around while Louise is worried because she has been given a heavy task as a void mage. She tries to cheer her up with gifts. On the other hand, the queen talks to Vittorio about the attack, which was not normal, and it could happen again during Louise and Tifania's appointment ceremony. However, Vittorio doesn't seem concerned as they have many precautions in place to prevent it from happening again. Nevertheless, the queen is still worried as his attitude seems suspicious. At night, the protagonist sees Louise in her priestess outfit and gets excited because she looks very beautiful. He throws her onto the bed, and Louise starts to give in, but they make too much noise and the chubby boy can hear everything clearly. Louise gets embarrassed and kicks him out. On the other hand, Pegashal prepares some fireballs that store a lot of magical power, but Joseph wants to use them as bombs, so Pegashal refuses to continue with his plan. Joseph considers him a hypocrite because he has done many bad things, such as kidnapping Tabitha. Back to the protagonist, the ceremony begins and Louise is appointed as a priestess. The protagonist congratulates her and goes to see Tifania, but she wants to confirm if he is truly her familiar, so she asks him for a kiss. Unfortunately, the chubby boy and Montmorency enter the scene and Tifania accidentally crushes the protagonist under her weight. She runs away in embarrassment and doesn't accomplish her goal. Later, a girl inside the cathedral approaches Louise, claiming to work for her father and seeking her blessing. However, her mother is left behind, so Louise accompanies her to receive her mother's blessing. The protagonist rushes when he hears this because she is once again in danger. But the thief who escaped the previous night appears and distracts the protagonist in search of revenge for his captured brother. Meanwhile, Louise realizes it's a trap, but it's too late as she is paralyzed and Sheffield arrives with her band of brothers, who are hired to capture Louise. They hand her over, and after mocking the protagonist, they leave. The protagonist searches everywhere, but it's too late. Giulio apologizes as everything happened in broad daylight without the use of magic. Tabitha arrives because she knows who the attackers are since they used to work together as Knights of Gallia. Upon discovering that Joseph is behind it all, the protagonist tries to go to Gallia to rescue Louise, but a messenger arrives with news that all the troops are gathering at the border with Gallia, and they will likely invade. Meanwhile, Louise wakes up and finds herself on the same ship as Sheffield and Joseph. Joseph now wants to use her powers to cause unprecedented damage with the help of an elf and a void mage working together. Sheffield uses the stolen mirror from the previous night to transfer Louise's powers to Joseph. In order to use the fireballs made by Bedashel, he needs Louise's explosion, so he sends the fireballs with the gargoyles, causing them to explode and forcing Romelia's troops to retreat since they don't know who is attacking them. Joseph feels nothing as he brings them down and continues his attack. The protagonist and his group notice that the gargoyles are exploding. Meanwhile, Louise sees that they will use the last fireball, so she frees herself and tries to take it by jumping into the sea. However, the gargoyle manages to retrieve it, and she starts calling for the protagonist. Just in time, the protagonist arrives and saves her. The protagonist boards Joseph's ship to stop him, but Sheffield prevents him from passing by summoning monsters repeatedly. The protagonist has to use what Giulio gave him, which is a gun. He immobilizes Sheffield to run towards Joseph. Meanwhile, Tabitha pursues the gargoyle carrying the fireball, but it's not easy to catch. Tifania has to intervene using her forgetting magic to immobilize it so they can defeat it. Tabitha tries to leave Louise in a safe place, but she refuses because she wants to help too. They all return to the ship. The protagonist confronts Joseph and threatens him to stop the spell, but Joseph ignores him. The protagonist shoots, but it doesn't hit because Joseph has the acceleration magic, making him too fast for the protagonist's attack. The protagonist tries to anticipate Joseph's moves, but Joseph is always one step ahead and even manages to grab the gun, putting the protagonist in checkmate. However, Louise arrives with the explosion and sends Joseph flying. Tabitha takes advantage of Joseph's immobilization to punish him, and they rescue the protagonist. They ask him to surrender so he can survive, but Joseph refuses, so Tabitha decides to kill him. Louise tries to stop Tabitha, but the protagonist tells her that it's a decision she must make considering everything Joseph has done to her. Tabitha decides to take him to Romelia to face justice, but Sheffield creates distance between them by causing the fireball to explode. The protagonists have no choice but to let them escape so Joseph can spend his final moments in peace. Before he explodes, Sheffield kisses him. Hours later, the Queen heals the protagonist and he accuses Vittorio of planning everything to get rid of Joseph, putting Louise in danger. Louise gets upset because it's a serious accusation, but Vittorio can't deny it as his intentions were for Joseph to react and generate a war so they could eliminate him. He apologizes for putting Louise in such danger. The protagonist is a bit upset with Louise because she doesn't seem affected by being used in such a way, but she tells him that she had faith that he would come to save her, and that's why she wasn't afraid. This disappoints Stefania as she realizes the strong bond between the protagonist and Louise, so she lets go of the idea that he is her familiar. The next day, the protagonists are praised at school for their heroic deeds, and a dance is organized in their honor. Tiffania is courted by a student, but Beatrice chases him away because she wants to find a man who deserves Tiffania. Meanwhile, the chubby boy overhears the conversation between the protagonist and Tiffania and spreads the rumor about their scene, resulting in Tiffania being called Melon. All the girls start giving fruit names to their breasts, but Siesta goes to tell Louise, who has the brilliant idea of buying their own house to prevent Tiffania from seducing the protagonist. They search for a mansion, but Louise complains about everything and gets even more upset when she finds out that Siesta will live with them. However, since it was the Queen who assigned Siesta to the protagonist, Louise can't do anything about it. After not finding any suitable mansions, they go to Scarin's bar, and Jessica recommends Louise to test the protagonist in bed before getting married just in case. Louise blushes and refuses, so Siesta tries to take advantage. However, they are not the only ones interested in the protagonist since he became popular after the play about how he defeated Joseph. This frustrates Louise and Siesta, so they decide to find a mansion as soon as possible. On the other hand, Tabitha returns to her country to help her mother as Bidashil gave her the cure for her mother's spell, hoping to undo some of the damage she caused. Tabitha can't help but cry when she sees her mother recovered. After several days of searching, the protagonists still can't decide on a house. However, Agnes seeks them out because the Queen wants to see them and apologize for the danger they faced in Romelia. She also informs them about Tabitha and wonders if it's what she really wants. The Queen changes the subject as she feels indebted to the protagonist, but due to the kingdom's current state, she decides to repay him with land. The protagonist visits the designated area, which is far away and mostly forested. They can't hide their disappointment when they see the mansion, but Louise agrees to live there so as not to leave the protagonist alone with Siesta. However, to their surprise, Tabitha arrives because she postponed her coronation to live with them, and Louise gets even angrier because it's even worse than at the academy and kicks everyone out. The next day, Louise's friends from the academy come to visit, guided by an elderly local since only elderly people live in these remote lands. However, the girls wonder why Tabitha is with the protagonist, and Ilokoku embarrass her by saying that she wants her older sister have children with Saito. Siesta doesn't waste any time and asks for the same thing. As a result, the protagonist flees to avoid that conversation. While the girls explore the house, the protagonist is with Louise. She feels uncomfortable because even though they have their own house, they have less privacy than at school. However, the protagonist reassures her, saying that no matter how many women there are, he will only love her. This calms Louise and they are about to move on to the next step, but Siesta interrupts them and Louise hits the protagonist to pretend that he convinced her of everything. In the afternoon, Louise has a visitor as Eleanor comes to take her back after learning that she is living in a mansion with a single man. The protagonist stops her, saying that he will make her happy and then talk to her parents. However, Eleanor refuses because, noble as he may be, he lacks manners, so Louise promises to educate him to be seen in a good light by other nobles. Eleanor reluctantly agrees, hoping that when she returns, a protagonist will have learned manners. They spend the whole afternoon in an intensive etiquette class sponsored by Louise. Meanwhile, the other girls return to their homes and the protagonist fails to learn anything, reaching his limit. He tries to stop, but Louise doesn't want him to give up because she can't be with someone who doesn't know how to be a noble. However, the protagonist leaves anyway. They end up sleeping in separate beds and the protagonist goes to the basement, where a plebeian is supposed to be. By accident, he discovers a secret passage, and when Louise finds him, he is kissing the Queen. It turns out that in this passage, there is a magical mirror that connects to the Queen's room in the castle. After recognizing each other, they were transported to that room. The Queen realizes it's a place for lovers since her grandfather disagreed with her marriage. This surprises the protagonist, but it's not uncommon in royalty, so the Queen gave up the idea of marrying for love and decided to do it for the good of her country. The protagonist believes that doing it that way doesn't make sense, and the Queen approaches him, They can't resist kissing each other. The protagonist tries to end it there, saying that he already has Louise, but the queen persists, believing it doesn't matter. However, Delflinger informs the protagonist that Louise saw them, so she leaves the house, and the protagonist doesn't stop her since she has every right this time. The next day, Louise meets with her friends and tells them that the queen is after the protagonist, which is why she gave up on him. Tabitha goes to her room to tell her that if she doesn't stay with the protagonist, she will, as she also wants to be a queen. Louise doesn't know how to process it, but Kirky explains that royalty doesn't have the freedom to love, and that's why Tabitha is trying to reason with her. Louise must be more determined and fight for the protagonist. Louise reconsiders and rushes to the protagonist, who no longer sees the point in staying in this world without Louise. She declares that he is the only one she wants, and the protagonist does the same. They reconcile, blocking the mirror so that nobody can enter or exit through it. Louise is surprised because this mirror has a very particular magic, but they are called out because something strange is happening. Hot springs are emerging, so the protagonist suggests organizing a party to inaugurate them. The school's knights are excited because they can peep at women, and the girls are happy because the hot springs are good for the skin. Back with Louise, she sees Tabitha and goes to thank her for making her see reason, but Tabitha only says that she will steal the protagonist the next chance she gets. At night, Tabitha looks dejected, and Elo convinces her to make a move since the protagonist will have to leave. Tabitha sneaks into the protagonist's bed, and he mistakes her for Louise, trying to touch her as usual. But when he realizes it's Tabitha, she straddles him so they can continue. Louise enters the room and sees them in a compromising position, so she beats up the protagonist. When it's time to sleep, a problem arises because all the girls want to sleep with the protagonist. He solves it by going to sleep alone. Louise can't bear to sleep without the protagonist, so she tries to sneak into his room, but Tabitha notices and Siesta won't let her go alone. They end up bumping their heads together. The next day, they receive all their guests, but Louise sees a suspicious person entering the house. She chases after them with Siesta and manages to ambush the person, but it turns out to be the queen who wanted to enter the hot springs. She talks to Louise directly about her attempt to seduce the protagonist, and Louise tries to deny it, but then admits that she fell in love with him. She declares war on the queen because she won't give up on trying to conquer him. They start fighting in the hot springs because Louise doesn't like that the queen always tries to take away her things since they were children. Nevertheless, after venting their frustrations, they make amends because the queen only wants to be honest with herself. She meets with the protagonist, who apologizes for reciprocating her feelings. Since meeting Louise, he feels like he's where he should be, so he will stay with her. However, the queen has no plans to give up on her feelings. Later, the girls take another bath together to enhance their feminine aspects and seduce the protagonist. However, Tiffania feels dizzy after staying in the water for too long, so they have to leave her resting in the mansion. The rest of the girls return to the academy. Louise takes the protagonist to the hot springs alone, undresses, and asks him to stay with her because all she wants is to be with him. She only asks him to stay alive so they can be together. The protagonist reciprocates, saying that his job is to keep her alive, so they agree to stay together until separates them. However, Louise regrets sharing the protagonist with others because she wants him only for herself, and they start kissing. Louise seems willing to take the next step. Unfortunately, Tiffany had gone to sleep in that bed, and her hand accidentally touches the protagonist's chest. Louise gets angry at the protagonist for touching another woman, causing him to explode. The next day, Tabitha says goodbye to the protagonist while he sleeps and tries to leave. However, the thief's siblings arrive to seek revenge for what happened in Romelia. They take advantage of attacking early in the morning to catch them off guard. The female thief enters the house while her brothers distract the others. The knights arrive as reinforcements, but they can't do much because the thieves are too strong. They manage to take Louise hostage and defeat the knights. Meanwhile, Tiffania witnesses the commotion and tries to help with her forgetting magic, but she is also being pursued by some elves, who arrive at the perfect time while everyone is fighting. Damien, the leader of the thieves, arrives. He didn't approve of this attack because no one would pay them for it, so he stops everyone by turning the ground into water. The bandits surrender, but they hear Tiffania scream, and the protagonist goes to see what's happening. The elves are trying to kidnap her. The protagonist tries to attack them, but they use a sleep spell on everyone. Realizing that the protagonist is the one who defeated Bidashel, they take him as well. The protagonist wakes up in a house with Tiffania, who has also just woken up. Luxiana, an elf, explains that they are being held captive in an oasis in the middle of the desert. Meanwhile, Louise goes to the queen to request a rescue mission to find the protagonist, but the queen refuses. Romelia wants to investigate the elves because they know nothing about them. The other students are also worried about the protagonist, but Louise tells them they won't do anything for now, although she won't stay calm and plans to go find the protagonist even if she has to do it alone. In the oasis, Luxiana starts interrogating the protagonist and Tiffania because she is conducting an investigation on humans. Bidashel arrives to ensure the protagonist's safety, and Luxiana's fiancé, who is part of the Elf Council, arrives as well. He heard that they wanted to kill captives because they don't know how they will react, which upsets Luxiana since he should support her in her investigation. Siesta discovers Louise's plan, so she plans to follow her to be by the protagonist's side. Tabitha also joins them, and they all set off together on the dragon. However, the journey is long and will take them 4 days without rest. Luckily, the professor takes them all in his ship. The protagonist confirms that they can't escape because the plants are using magic. Tiffania feels guilty because it's because of her that they're trapped, but the protagonist decides to worry about it later. If they can't escape, at least they will enjoy the time they have. The protagonist goes into the water and Tiffania follows, not bothered by being naked since they are friends. The protagonist looks away, realizing there's a piece of metal in the middle of the oasis. He dives to investigate and discovers it's an airplane from his world. The next day, the protagonist continues investigating the airplane, and Luxiana realizes that Tiffania has feelings for the protagonist. However, she is resigned because the protagonist's heart belongs to Louise. Just then, Eri arrives because the council is summoning humans to decide what to do with them. It is revealed that there are elves who blindly hate humans, and during the trial, most of them supported the humans. They don't want to let them live because the prophecy states that if the 4 void mages gather, it will bring an end to the elves. Now there is a half-elf like Tiffania, who has the appearance of an elf but possesses void powers. Eri tries to kill her, so the protagonist intervenes and they end up locked up. In the cell, Tiffania confesses her feelings to the protagonist and kisses him. However, he starts burning because he had formed another familiar contract with Tiffania. She reveals that she had suspected she was his familiar but didn't tell him because there had never been a familiar with 2 masters before. Bidashel and his nephews arrive to rescue them as they disagree with the idea of killing them. Luxiana only wanted to investigate them, but she didn't anticipate that the elves would try to kill them without listening to reason. The protagonist wonders why they are helping him since he used to serve Joseph, but Bidashel learned while searching for Joseph that it is not the power of the void they should fear, but rather people with evil hearts who can turn anything into a weapon. So Tiffania and the protagonist pledge never to use their power for evil, and after witnessing everything, Bidashel believes them. They reach the exit, but it is blocked as they were discovered due to suspicions surrounding Bidashel. Soldiers arrive and attack everyone who helped them. The protagonist fights to defend them, but refrains from killing to avoid generating more hatred towards humans. Meanwhile, Louise has already arrived in the land of the elves, and they encounter an elven warship. They decide to evade it due to their high speed, but they still suffer significant damage from the dragons. To make matters worse, an entire fleet arrives to destroy them, and the protagonist decides to surrender. The elves ask about their intentions, and the protagonist reveals that he only wants to rescue his kidnapped companions. However, they don't seem to be aware of the situation. On the other hand, Louise is hiding and thinking about how to rescue the protagonist, who is trapped without an escape route. The elves plan to kill him with poisonous gas, but the protagonist keeps thinking that they can escape. His desire to be reunited with Louise is so strong that it seems to connect with her, and a new spell appears, opening a portal for the protagonist. However, Louise is so exhausted that the portal would have closed if it weren't for the protagonist's new rune revitalizing her. The portal becomes large enough for everyone to escape. The captain of the elven fleet cannot tolerate the idea of humans being held captive, so he wants to take them as prisoners. However, Bidashel was this captain's mentor, so he confirms the protagonist's story and asks him to let them go. The next day, the protagonist has to explain that he is now also Tiffania's familiar. However, his waifus are only concerned that he kissed her for this reason, so all of his waifus get upset. On the other hand, the elves decide to go to the human lands and Bidashel will remain hidden. Eri wants to go with him, but it is too dangerous, so she stays behind. Days later, they arrive in Gallia, but Louise is upset because the protagonist spends a lot of time with Tiffania. However, she can't be too angry because she learns that Tabitha has agreed to be crowned now that she has arrived in Gallia. While Tabitha gets ready, Siesta tells Louise to mark her territory since the protagonist spends too much time with Tiffania. To make matters worse, she sees the protagonist touching Tiffania, so they rush to stop their intimacy. However, the protagonist was only helping her remove a fly from her clothes, and they leave together to explore the area. Meanwhile, Luxiana is fascinated by the human city and wants to visit the palace, but Eri prefers to stay behind as she finds the complexity of the buildings bothersome. However, Gyuch and the chubby boy stop her, fearing that if her true identity as an elf is discovered, it could cause problems for Tabitha. The chubby boy tries to stop Luxiana forcefully, but ends up grabbing her breasts, so Eri threatens him to let her go. Gyuch gets angry as he nearly killed his friend, but the protagonist arrives and upon realizing what happened, tries to mediate. He attempts to convince Gyuch to get along, but Gyuch doesn't like the idea as Eri speaks in a condescending manner. The protagonist goes to Louise and helps her choose her dress. She asks him to try it on, but Tiffania also arrives asking for his assistance. However, the dress is too tight for him, causing it to burst and leaving him exposed. At that moment, Eri informs Gyuch that Luxiana has escaped, so they go to search for her. The protagonist can't help them as he has to go with the queen. Meanwhile, Luxiana secretly explores the castle's surroundings. Meanwhile, Vittorio meets with the queen and the protagonist, apologizing for not coming to their rescue earlier. However, the protagonist holds no grudges, and they inform him about the portal Louise opened and how she did it thanks to him. They confirm that he is now Tifania's familiar and possesses the power to amplify the Void Mage's magic. Upon leaving, they encounter Kirchi, who wants to have a girls' night out, so they leave the protagonist alone. Montmorency sees Gucci checking out blondes and gets upset, thinking he is flirting despite him explaining that he is just looking for someone. Eri realizes that humans and elves are quite similar when it comes to women, and Lakshana appears before the girls, embarrassing Montmorency, who realizes that Gucci was telling the truth. Lakshana also believes that her way of reacting to men is very similar. Thanks to this, Gucci becomes good friends with Eri since he understands what it's like to deal with women, and Lakshana becomes friends with Montmorency, making the protagonist happy that they managed to get along. The next day, the successful coronation takes place, and in the evening, the protagonist helps Louise get ready for the ball. He also explains that it doesn't matter whether he has one or several masters because his love is for her. However, he has to leave and Louise tries to chase after him. In doing so, she overhears Vittorio talking about the price she has to pay for using Tifania's rune. If she uses too much power, she will eventually die. Vittorio didn't reveal this earlier because he doesn't want her to use her power with fear, but Louise doesn't know how to react to this news. At the ball, Louise can't stop thinking about what she heard and spends the night crying. The next day, Siesta notices that something is troubling her, but Louise puts up a strong front, saying that nothing is wrong, although she fails to convince her. The queen summons the protagonist and Tifania because Vittorio wants them to investigate something dangerous. An entire village has been reduced to ashes, and Tabitha lends her dragon to them to reach the location quickly. However, upon arrival, they find that the capital of Romalia has been completely burned and the local dragons attack them. The protagonist does his best to defend against the dragons, but ultimately retreats as Giulio informs them that all the dragons in the area have gone mad and burned everything. However, the protagonist managed to control his dragon Illo thanks to his mark, as Illo belongs to a different species and should not be affected. The culprit is the ancestral dragon, emitting a miasma that drives the dragons into aggression. Vittorio declares that they will confront the ancestral dragon with the help of the Void Mages and their familiars, mentioning that it might be the prophecy foretelling a danger that will threaten the world when all the Void Mages gather. He intends to defeat it with Louise's explosion magic, while Tifania will take care of the smaller dragons with her spell to make them forget their previous actions. Vittorio will nullify the dragon's magical barrier and ask the protagonist to boost Louise's magic if necessary. Louise refuses, knowing that using her power will shorten her life, but the protagonist accepts anyway. Julia worries about the protagonist, but Vittorio has faith that he will survive even after using his power multiple times, although it is a fact that each use shortens his life. Louise tells the protagonist about the side effects of using that power, leaving him speechless upon learning that he could die if he uses it too much. However, Louise has no intention of letting that happen and decides to defeat the dragon with her magic alone. Unfortunately, Tifania overhears their conversation and feels guilty for making him her familiar. The dragon arrives in the forest and the Holy Knights attack it, managing to immobilize it with rocks from the mountains. However, the dragon and the smaller dragons retaliate. Tifania uses her magic to free the smaller dragons from the influence of the ancestral dragon. Vittorio uses his void magic, which is regeneration, but being an evil creature, the miasma protecting the dragon disintegrates him. The protagonist uses his boosting power to amplify the effect of the spell, but he quickly becomes exhausted. The dragon manages to grow a third eye, controlling Chulio's dragon to approach it and launching fire at it. Delflinger advises the protagonist to use his power, and he manages to stop the attack, but gets destroyed in the process. The protagonist is sent flying, but Louise catches him. Unfortunately, Vittorio's magic ceases to function and he throws Chulio to safety, only to be devoured by the ancestral dragon. Our heroes rescue Giulio, but in the process, the ancient dragon breaks free from the rubble, leaving them with no choice but to make a tactical retreat. The protagonist faints and wakes up the next day, where he is told that the dragon had curled up after crossing the forest but remains alive, so they will have to fight it again. The protagonist acts excited because now they have to prepare for the second round, but Louise cannot stay in the room as she knows he must be sad about Delflinger, although she doesn't want to say anything. The director of the Magic Academy arrives after conducting research on this dragon, and it turns out that in the past, all 4 Void Mages were needed to defeat it. However, it doesn't mean it cannot be defeated in another way, so now they will fight with the new weapons they have developed over the past 6,000 years. They can now form international alliances, so they gather all the countries on the continent to fight together and overcome this calamity. The Queen informs Louise about this, but Louise still believes it is solely the responsibility of the Void Mages. The Queen corrects her, stating that the assistance of all countries should be helpful, even if only a little, and as people belonging to the continent, they have a duty to protect their home. Louise agrees with this notion, so she will fight with all her might but wants to leave the protagonist aside since he wasn't born in this world and therefore shouldn't sacrifice himself to save it. The protagonist hasn't given up on the fight because he must defeat the dragon for Delflinger's sake. He meets with the elves to inquire about the plane that was submerged in the oasis, wanting to know if any of them are in good condition as one of its missiles could defeat the dragon. However, the elves don't possess such a plane, so they come up with the idea of opening a portal to the protagonist's world and bringing one from there. Louise hears this idea and agrees to give it a try. They start the plan to bring a warplane from the protagonist's world, with Louise using her power to open a portal, and it actually works. But just as the protagonist crosses to the other side, Louise begins to say her goodbyes and sets him free on the other side, so he can live his life. Harem becomes upset since they needed him to defeat the dragon, but calms down upon seeing that Louise is the one who is hurting the most by doing this. Louise informs the queen and the others about the decision she made, and they agree it is the right thing for him to return to his world. Now they must make an effort to defeat the dragon with their own powers. The director takes them to the academy, and on the way he tells them that according to the records, the dragon becomes stronger when it devours void mages. That's why it is targeting them directly. When it starts moving again, it pursues Louise and Tiffania, which is why they chose the academy as the place to confront it, as it would be far away from any town and there would be no collateral damage. The fleet of ships intercepts it, and they fight with all they have after evacuating all the students from the academy. They arrive, and Louise is surprised to see that no one has evacuated because they want to fight the dragon, even the thief brothers, who were hired by Tabitha because they don't want the world to end. Louise sees that everyone is united to defeat the dragon, but she thinks about the protagonist who is in the city trying to find a way back. She realizes that there is no way, but everyone seems to have courage. The dragon wakes up and now has the ability to fly, quickly heading towards the academy, devastating anything in its path, including the army's ships. Oh no. At dawn, the dragon is already very close to the academy, and it seems that the Queen's international fleet won't arrive in time. However, the Thief Brothers use artifacts strengthened by spirits to create an anti-beast barrier that protects them from the attacks of the ancient dragon and the smaller dragons. Meanwhile, the protagonist continues to search for ways to return to Louise and realizes that there will be an eclipse that same day, which gives him an idea. Returning to the academy, the international fleet arrives and bombards the ancient dragon with all they have. It seems they managed to defeat it, but the dragon rises again with a wound on its back and enough strength to launch an attack that would have killed them if it weren't for Big Ashel, who arrived with a fleet of elves, absorbing the attacks into the fireballs that concentrate the spirits. The dragon focuses on finding the void mages, breaking the barrier protecting the academy. Louise realizes that the dragon is only after them, so they lure it while flying on Tabitha's dragon, ensuring no one else gets hurt. The smaller dragons start attacking them, but Tiffania uses her forgetting magic to get rid of them. However, it doesn't work on the ancient dragon, and to make matters worse, the queen cannot attack as it could harm Louise. They realize there is a hole in the dragon's barrier, so Louise uses her explosion magic on that point, but it doesn't work, causing them to fall. Meanwhile, the protagonist manages to reach an airbase, and it's almost time for the eclipse, so he flies toward it, theorizing that it will allow him to return to Louise's world. Back with Louise, she's about to be devoured by the ancient dragon, but the protagonist arrives to save her, launching missiles at the dragon. Now that he has returned to this world, the protagonist shoots the dragon with everything he has. He realizes that Delflinger is still alive, residing within his rune. They join forces and manage to completely break the dragon's barrier, allowing Louise to use her explosion magic. Louise has exhausted her strength, and the protagonist tries to recharge her, but she refuses, fearing it would shorten his life. However, the protagonist promises her that he won't die because he would never leave her alone, and he transfers his energy to her through a kiss. The queen attacks again with all her might, and the protagonist uses the plane as a final projectile so that Louise can hit the dragon with the strongest explosion ever created, reducing it to pieces, quite literally. The protagonist falls unconscious after using all the power from Tiffania's rune, causing Louise to start crying, hoping that he will wake up. The protagonist opens his eyes because despite using Tiffania's powers, he still has the life he possesses as Gandalfr. Taking advantage of the situation, the protagonist asks Louise to fulfill the request he made some time ago, referencing the marriage proposal. Louise blushes, thinking he is talking about something else since there are many people watching, but he clarifies that he means marriage. Louise accepts, and days later, they celebrate their wedding, filled with love, enjoying a life in which they can travel between the protagonist's world and Louise's, experiencing the best of both worlds. The world is at peace, and our happy couple is seen ringing the bell for meeting Sato's parents. What an ending!